Lowe's Theaters welcomes you to the exciting world of the movies. Smoking is not permitted in this auditorium. It's the law. Certificates are available at the box office. Thanks for helping us keep the theater clean. As you exit the auditorium, please deposit litter in trash receptacles in the lobby. Please be considerate and don't talk during the show.
Thank you for coming to Lowe's. Sit back and relax. Enjoy the show.
Hey guys, welcome to the Retro Movie Love Podcast. We're on episode 3. It's been a while since we recorded, but it's great to be back. Thanks for you guys who have been listening and asking about the show. We feel really flattered here about that. And if you're a new listener, I hope you enjoy it. So with me today, as always, is Ben Sher, the Eyes of Ben Sher blog and Chiller TV. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Yay. So we decided to do something, switch up a little bit, and do something a little different. We're still doing our top fives, but we're going to focus on a studio this time. In particular, Touchstone films from the 80s. And I hope some of you guys out there are fans of Touchstone films. I know we are. We talk about them a lot. There's a lot of films that from their catalog from the 80s and 90s that we keep going back to. And we decided, why not do our top fives and talk about all these fun movies that came out from that decade. And then at some point we'll get back to it and do the 90s. But why not do the 80s? For you, Ben, how do you feel about Touchstone? What drives you to them?
It's the interesting thing about Touchstone is I think that maybe you disagree with me, but even though they made films from a lot of different genres, all of the Touchstone films really, you just know they're from Touchstone. They all have this almost all of them, have this very 80s tacky feeling of glamour that is not that other movies don't have. I mean, I think that, the perfect example of that would be like Danny DeVito and Bette Midler's house in Ruthless People, which we may or may not talk about later, with all the weird, color geometric furniture and, neon curly cues on the walls. That's just a very Touchstone setting. And you don't see settings like that in most other 80s movies. And I love, they had a lot of, I really realized watching all these movies again, they had a lot of recurring cast members that I liked. I guess a lot of actors must have had contracts with them. And they really just take me back to the 80s in a way that most other movies don't. And I have an unusual amount of nostalgia for the Touchstone movies. I don't know if it's because they were so ever-present at the video store and on TV, or if it's because I really love Ben Midler, and Shelley Long, who were in a lot of them. But there's just something very unique, and maybe my favorite movie studio of all time. What about you?
Oh, totally. There's something very charming and cozy about them. I keep going back to them. A lot of them were comedies and feel-good movies, so that's part of why I like them. They did switch up into different genres, but even when they did, a lot of them were still fairly funny, like the action comedies. They had a lot of humor to them. There's something about them. I think it's a lot of it has to do with they have a lot of replay value. There's a lot of Touchstone movies that you keep going back to. You can watch them kind of over and over. There were big studio movies, and Touchstone stuff was kind of a new brand in the 80s. Disney was wanting to make more adult-oriented fare, and so they created the Touchstone label. I think they started it with 1984 because of Splash. They had this property Splash, and it was essentially a movie about a naked woman. And so they were afraid to release it on their Disney banner, so they created the Touchstone label so they could release it. And it kind of took off from there. That was a big hit, so they started releasing movies under that banner, and a lot of them turned out to be big hits. So like you said, because maybe they were so readily available at the video store, and they played in a lot of theaters. That's probably why I would go back to them often. But they were also a lot of fun, and there were films that were made with sometimes really good directors like Paul Mazursky and Frank Perry and a few others like John Badham, who I like. And there's like little weird things like, I don't know if you remember the videotapes from the Touchstone, but the labels, remember
The big white...
they're always bigger than the actual
Yes.
tape. I always thought that was interesting, seeing this label on a video that was so much bigger than the other ones. And I thought that was kind of... that
And it was
drew
kind
me
of
to
cool
them a
that they
bit.
were so colorful, too. They always had, like, the big blue and gold logo and the font from the box. There was something very special about them.
Yeah, and the artwork on the boxes always stood out. I know you mentioned Ruthless People, and I think you mentioned something on Facebook about how the artwork for that film is such a standout. And maybe it's the way they sold their movies with such bright colors and...
Yes. I mean, Outrageous Fortune is another, like, totally iconic cover and then poster. Ruthless People, I was sad because I was hoping maybe that... I know the original poster with the big screw, which I don't particularly like. I was hoping maybe that the video box was, like, a B poster that you could get, but I haven't been able to find one anywhere. It's only seemed to be on the video cover. But yeah, Touchstone was all about bright colors and happiness and happy endings. And I thought, well, usually happy endings, and I love that about those movies.
Yeah, and they kept it up, and they had a string of hits throughout the 80s, and a lot of them we're going to talk about today. And it kind of petered out towards the end of the 80s. I don't want to single out movies, but I will, because like Three Fugitives, maybe, Turn Hooch, Disorganized Crime, they just weren't up to the snuff of the movies that came before it, I think, and the studio kind of lost some of its edge. But then I think things kind of changed in 1990 when a certain romantic comedy became a really huge hit. And you could probably guess which movie that is. And we might actually talk about it when we get to the 90s stuff on our next podcast, whenever that is. But they made really fine movies, and you know, they went through a lot of regimes since the 80s, and I can understand why some of the quality of it has changed and why Touchstone means a whole different thing now than it did back in the 80s. But that's why we relive them on DVD, video, and whatever, because we love them.
And one thing I noticed watching all of these movies again is I said to you, I expected with a lot of them that, you know, because they're so steeped in nostalgia for me. And I think sometimes when a movie's so steeped in nostalgia and you haven't seen it for a while, it's not as good. Sometimes that's not true, but sometimes it is. But every time watching these movies again, I was like, God, this is like better than it was when I was little. They just age in like fine wine with time.
Exactly. I think for a long time they were just considered maybe largely silly movies. Some of them have more prestige than others. But I think over time they're going to be considered more counted as the classics of the 80s. And I really appreciate the studio for putting out some fine entertainment and quality. So let's get to our top fives. Let's start with your number 5. Here we go.
From Touchstone Pictures.
I want to rent you.
Rent me?
Dating the town's most fantastic girl made Ronald Miller popular.
Totally chic.
But breaking up with her made him a star.
Legendary status.
He's cute, sweet.
Ladies!
Until he realized it's not who you're with, it's who you are.
All I ever wanted to do was get close to you.
He's such a heartbreaker.
Can't Buy Me Love. Rated PG-13.
One show sneak preview tomorrow night.
Can't Buy Me Love is the iconic 80s teen movie, which was, I think, probably one of the most oft-played on TV Touchstone movies of the 80s. I vaguely remember that, where Patrick Dempsey plays Ronald, a nerd who mows lawns for a living, who is tired of his lot in the high school caste system, and he pays Cindy, the beautiful blonde pinnacle of perfection, $1,000 to be his girlfriend for a month so that he can kind of get into the in crowd. And she accepts this pretty shady offer to like sort of prostitute herself because she spilled red wine on her mother's coat while wearing it to a party, and she thinks $1,000 will help her replace it. So she gives him a makeover, and makeovers, I've been thinking about, were very big in Touchstone movies, which is one of the reasons I love them. Almost all of them, it seems, feature a makeover scene. And he becomes very popular, and everybody will do everything that he does because it's trendy, including a really dorky insect dance, which is pretty iconic and legendary. But naturally, he learns that, popularity that you paid $1,000 for brings with it a price, and there are complications, and possibly a romance ensues, along with a scene where he takes her to an airplane graveyard he takes Cindy to an airplane graveyard that I always found very melancholy and sort of beautiful and touching. So it's a very uplifting. It's a very fun, uplifting romantic comedy. I will say though that I always thought it was a little bizarre that after Patrick Dempsey's big makeover, he looks like a much dorkier than he did before by any standards, including 80s standards. He just looks like a total nightmare, and I was kind of like, what were the filmmakers of this movie intending for us to believe? Like that this could pass for cool. But it's okay, because I want Patrick Dempsey to be cool, no matter how, even if he's wearing a crazy Mexican pattern jacket and like a dorky country tie and has awful slicked back hair. So that's my read of Can't Buy Me Love.
I know that look of his is pretty terrible once he changes. Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking. I think maybe there's some sort of commentary that how uncool the actual cool people are by accepting someone who looks like that. I'm not sure.
That makes sense.
Like, they'll pretty much buy into anything if it's presented a certain way. And maybe that's part of what they're trying to go for. I'm not sure. But, yeah, he looks awful. I love this movie. It came out in 1987. A year, rather, I absolutely loved. There's so many movies that I saw that year. I made it a point to see as many as possible. I might have mentioned this before. It was like a golden year for me, and that summer in particular, there are a lot of films came out, and I saw a lot of them several times. I think I saw Can't Buy Me Love about 5 times.
Oh my God.
It was a great summer. And the movies I liked a lot, like this and another Touchstone movie that we'll get to later, I saw over and over in the theater. I think they just appealed to me. That Ronald Miller's plight as a nerd trying to fit in is something we can all relate to. And I think what the filmmakers do is they craft a funny movie around a pretty basic plot, and they fill it with some fun side characters and a central character that you actually like. I think Patrick Dempsey is really charming in this movie, and I think I forgot her name, Amanda something.
Yeah, I don't remember her last name either, but she was notable because so often the popular blonde in these movies, even if she was the protagonist, was kind of unlikable, and she's very, very sweet and has some depth. And
yes, Amanda Peterson. I'm sorry, Amanda Peterson. I totally blanked on your name there. Blanking a lot this morning. But yeah, she's, having her be a fledgling poet may have kind of sunk the movie in a way, but they do it in a way that's kind of charming. She confides in him. She's finally opening up to him, and she shows him her poetry, and he likes it. But then, of course, that's used as a plot device later in the movie where he kind of turns it against her, and there's some animosity because her words are used while trying to pick up a girl, and just kind of becomes a real dick in the movie.
Very painful. It's very painful. It's
just so hard to watch, and because it's going to be such a downfall for him, and it happens I think on New Year's Eve, and just especially hard to watch. But Ronald Miller is a fun character, and The jocks in this movie were pretty awful. I think one of them was played by Rico Suave himself.
Oh my god, I didn't remember that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Rico Suave, but I'm just going to call you Rico Suave. They were... I'm going to give it up to you straight. I did not have high school experience anything like Can't Buy Me Love. We didn't have such divisions like they do in teen comedies of the 80s. Like with the popular kid, the very popular jocks, the burnouts, and the nerds, and so on. We kind of all just kind of hung out together, and there were some cliques, but it wasn't as defined as it is in these movies.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more of an East Coast thing, but West Coast, it seems to, like every single movie about the West Coast had such clearly divided lines within their high schools. And maybe a lot of it's, I noticed like West Coast high schools, because the weather's so nice and warm, a lot of it would be outdoors, and everyone would like sit together at lunch in certain areas, and this movie has all the jocks in a certain place, and Ronald Miller infringes on their territory, and they get upset, and that's the scene. You know, I'm a big fan of teen films in general, and Can't Buy Me Love, I kind of rank up there with the best of them, because it just gives me a certain good feeling every time I watch it. There's, of course, a choreographed dance scene. That's always a prerequisite for teen comedies, and I think this one's a lot of fun.
A makeover, a dance scene. This movie really kind of goes through the 80s teen comedy greatest hits conventions.
It does. It has them all. I remember when I went to see this movie 5 times in a theater, I befriended an usher in the theater, and he was really creepy. I have a story about him that I'll share on another podcast. Okay. It's for The Lost Boys. And he totally creeped me out, but we ended up becoming kind of friends, and I remember a conversation we had in Can't Buy Me Love that was a lot of fun, while also being kind of creepy. So anytime I watch Can't Buy Me Love, I always think of that weird, creepy usher.
I wonder what happened to him. Was this at a Times Square theater, or was it in Brooklyn?
At this point, we lived in Brooklyn, and it was a theater that was literally up the block from me, so you could see why would see movies like 5 times.
Yes.
Because it was so easily accessible, and they would always play the popular movies, and Can't Buy Me Love was a fairly popular movie. I think it made $31 million at the box office, which was a pretty healthy sum for a teen comedy. It was released August in 1987, around my birthday, which is... I remember going to see it for the second time as a birthday treat. I also have to mention Darcy DeMoss as one of the slutty girls that takes a liking to him once he becomes popular. Give a shout out to Darcy DeMoss.
What else was she in?
She was she's best known for maybe Friday the 13th Part 6. She was the girl in the camper.
That's
where
right.
Her face goes through the camper.
Poor thing.
Yeah, and she was in Reform Schoolgirls and quite a few others.
Wow, this period, 86, 87, was really a big moment for her then.
Yes, definitely her biggest moment. And I thought she was pretty fun as one of the slutty girls. Probably my favorite of the 3 slutty girls that gets tries to get it on with Ronald Miller. Is
she the one who actually says the line, or is that one of the rich bitchy girls? Was there a difference?
Which line?
Yeah, he went from totally geek to totally chic.
She says it.
She says it. Okay.
Yeah, I think she says most of those very memorable lines actually come from her. So maybe that's why she stands out a bit more for me, because a lot of those lines seem to come from Darcy DeMoss. Could I ask you, would you spend $1,000 to become so popular?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I must have thought about this when I was watching this movie over and over again in the late 80s and early 90s, because I definitely wasn't popular, and I guess I wanted to be. You know, I don't think so. I don't think I would have, because A, this movie is such a powerful cautionary tale.
Mm-hmm.
And B, I think even at that time, if I had $1,000, I would have wanted to spend it on laser discs or some dorky thing. So, yeah, it's hard for me to say now, but I don't think so. What about you?
Yeah, I thought about it, but no. Absolutely not. It seems like such a waste of money. $1,000 is a lot. I was, 12 in 1987, so $1,000 would have been, like, I could buy a car.
Yeah, totally.
I'd rather buy a car. I'd rather buy a car than a telescope, put it that way. But, yeah, maybe he should have went for the telescope. I don't know. That would have been a different movie.
Yeah, that's right. That's so dorky that he wanted to get a telescope. But, I mean, it's nice. It's a nice idea. I always used to think telescopes were so boring. I remember everyone had a telescope in that time. Maybe people still do when they're young, and I could never see anything out of them.
Again, another East Coast thing. You just didn't see the stars as well as you do on the West Coast.
That is so true. That was the first thing when I got to LA. I looked up and I was like, oh my God, stars. Because I had been living in New York City where they're literally, there's no such thing.
Right.
So it was, that's interesting.
It's like science fiction stars and space. Anyway, we love you, Ronald Miller. We love you, Can't Buy Me Love. Let's go on to my number 5.
Touchstone Films presents Danny DeVito. To the Kidnappers. Judge Reinhold. Ellen Slater.
Is there anything about my face you want to change?
And Bette Midler as Barbara Stone.
It's not her.
Oh, hello.
In the year's most ruthless comedy, Ruthless People. Ruthless People.
Starts Friday. Check local listings.
Okay, so that trailer doesn't really give a lot away, but plot-wise, it's millionaire businessman Sam Stone plots to murder his wife, Barbara, for her family fortune, and so he can hook up with his mistress, but he can't believe his luck when she's kidnapped by the usually tender and sweet Ken and Sandy Kessler, played by Judge Reinhold and Helen Slater, and they want revenge from Sam for stealing their savings. Sandy's money. She made this fashion design that was pretty bankable for Sam, and he kind of stole her ideas and he marketed it as her own. And then Barbara learns that Sam isn't paying the ransom because he wants her dead, basically, and that he ripped her kidnappers off, so she becomes friends with them, and then they conspire to get revenge once and for all. So Ruthless People is a movie that I really adored growing up. It's another one of those Touchstone movies that has all this endless replay value. I just like the characters, even though they were behaving pretty badly. It was an R-rated comedy full of a lot of foul language and bad behavior, and part of that is what drew me to it. But it was very funny in the way it portrayed its characters and the situations they got themselves in. Bette Midler. This is the first of the many Bette Midler movies we'll talk about, and I think she's really funny here in a role that's kind of that isolates her from most of the cast. She spends a lot of time either on screen by herself or with Judge Reinhold or Helen Slater, and it's kind of interesting seeing her play against those actors in particular. She gets some choice moments with Danny DeVito later in the movie, but we don't really see a lot of them together, but we know that they immediately hate each other because just the way they talk and behave. It's a movie about language and behavior, and I think the script by, I think it was a first-time writer, I'm not 100%, what was his name, Dale Launer. It's a pretty sharp script, giving the characters giving the actors a lot to chew on. There's a lot of fun dialogue in this movie. It's our first, Bette Midler's also first Barbara character that she played in 1986.
Oh, is that right?
Barbara
I didn't realize that.
was in Down and Out Beverly Hills, a movie.
Oh yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, I was like, wait, was this before? No, okay, that makes sense.
It came out, I believe, in June of 1986, and it was a huge hit at the box office. It made like $71 million. Probably one of the bigger Touchstone titles. Anita Morris playing the sexbot mistress. I think she's really fun to watch. I always like to see her in anything. And I think you mentioned earlier about the look of the movies being very 80s. This is probably the most 80s looking movie ever.
That may very well be.
From the art direction to the fashions and everything else. I mean, fashions play a big role in this movie because Helen Slater's character is a fashion designer. Sam Stone is a fashion manufacturer, and he steals her designs. So fashions do play a big part in this movie, and they play a big part, like you mentioned, in quite a few Touchstone movies, and we'll definitely get to them. I just am a big fan of this movie. I think it's a lot of fun. And it's a movie that I loved a lot, like I said, when I was a kid, and then I kind of cooled down to it over the years because maybe I thought Danny DeVito maybe might have been a little bit over the top sometimes. But then watching it again recently, I just really clicked with his performance, and I just thought he was so much fun to watch, along with everyone else. And everyone else gets a chance to shine, including Bill Pullman, whose first movie this was. He's really funny as one of the stupidest, or one of the, I can't remember the line, but this might be the stupidest person
who ever lived, or the stupidest criminal.
He's really funny. Anyway, how do you feel about Ruthless People?
Yeah, I had the exact same experience that you did. I was obsessed with it when I was younger, and I think, I mean, exactly just like you say, that everything. It had lots of bad behavior and filthy language and talk about deviant sex, and Bette Midler being maybe as over the top as she ever was in any of her movies, and one of the best makeovers, I think. I mean, Helen Slater's couture that Bette Midler gets to wear is just so extraordinarily 80s and fantastic. I just love it so much. But then, yeah, I kind of, as the years passed, it became one of my least favorite of the Bette Midler Touchstone movies. But then when I watched it again for this podcast, I was like, this movie is so fantastic. It really is. The screenplay is just brilliant. The way that it piles on the misunderstandings, and the dialogue is perfect. I mean, both of the scenes when Bette Midler terrorizes the kidnappers by telling them what's going to happen to them in jail. I love it so much. Her delivery, it's a nice butt. That's what they'll say. It's so perfect. And I really feel for poor Judge Reinhold and Sandy, Helen Slater in this movie. It is hard to be a good person in this terrible world. So I think that Ruthless People really conveys what it's like to live in American culture.
Oh, I agree. It's just it's such a fun, vibrant movie that just scene after scene, it just kind of never slows down, and just kind of gets more and more crazy as it goes along. It's just fun from beginning to end.
I also love that the serial killer pops up at the end.
Yes.
And you look like my mother. I hate my mother. It was so perfect. Oh, I love it so much.
He pops out of nowhere, but then it's used so smartly in the plot. Like his body is used to cover up for the kidnappers, and I think it's just so well done. The writer, I think, also did another comedy I like from the early 90s called My Cousin Vinny, which was a huge hit, and I thought that was another really funny, crackling comedy that's never has any dull spots. It's really funny from beginning to end, a lot like Ruthless People. Going back to my 11-year-old, 12-year-old self for a moment, the videotape with the incriminating videotape for the police commissioner. I think it's the police commissioner. I can't remember his character, but he's having sex with a prostitute, I assume. And I remember that being a very choice scene for me because of the actress in the video maybe having big boobs.
Oh, was this like a rewind over and over again kind of scene for you?
Yes, seeing big boobs as an 11-year-old was very exciting. So I'd watch that scene a lot and have fun watching it. But
it's funny. Jason, my partner, and I were talking about how big boobs. Because we were gay, but we were obsessed with big boobs too when we were that age. And like we were watching Airplane last night, and there's a scene where the naked woman, things get chaotic on the plane, and the naked woman just runs into the screen, and he was saying how he used to rewind that over and over again. So I guess no matter what, whether you're gay or straight, when you're an 11 or 12-year-old boy, boobs in a movie are just the most exciting thing ever.
Exactly. Always the highlight. I'm trying to think of what else this movie is a standout, but I mean, we pretty much said it. It's a fun movie from beginning to end.
And, I'll add too. Watching this movie, I noticed this today. I usually hate overplotted movies. It takes a lot for me to get excited over a movie with tons of twists and machinations, and this is like a sort of spoof of those kind of crazy, endlessly complex heist movies. But it really, every single plot twist and, confusion and misunderstanding is delivered with such punch in this movie that it doesn't become boring, it doesn't become overwhelming, and it's always funny. And I really appreciated that. I also want to give a shout-out to Judge Reinhold, who I think we'll be talking about several times today. He's just so charming and cute, and I really miss him.
Yeah, same here. I know he's gotten a facelift since.
Oh, really?
Since the 80s, I've seen a recent picture of him, and kind of strange to see him that way. But we miss you, 80s Judge Reinhold. We really do. Before I forget, Ruthless People has a song in it by Billy Joel that I love. It's called Modern Woman. It's the song during the montage. I think it so perfectly fits that montage that it's so much fun. And I'm not a Billy Joel fan by any means whatsoever. Just thought I had to mention that Ruthless People is a fun movie and it has a Billy Joel song, and I can't believe I like that.
I have a random story about, maybe this is going to take up too much time, but I'll tell it anyway, about how one's expectations of movie conventions have changed. In probably the early 90s, I took a class at the Knowledge Network. I don't know if they have that in New York, but in Albany, it's just like basically an adult education class for bored adults who wanted to do something. So I took a class on screenwriting with this guy who had allegedly written a bunch of episodes of movies and TV shows, and I remember he brought a gigantic bag of donuts and ate the entire thing and just spent the whole time being really cynical and crazy. And he gave us a screenplay of some movie that he'd written or somebody had written that had not been picked up, and we should read it. And I remember at the beginning, it was about a struggling screenwriter, and in the pre-credits scene, the screenwriter's walking in the subway, and the pages go everywhere, and they're trying to pick them up, and he says, "This one's a winner," and then it goes to freeze frame, and some Billy Joel song playing on the credits, and I was 10, and I remember thinking, wow, this is a real movie script. That sounds like something that would be in a movie. And now that doesn't sound like anything that would ever happen in a movie. So I miss Billy Joel. I miss Billy Joel being a convention in the modern comedy.
Okay, Billy Joel. Let's move on to our number 4s. Here we go.
Take one typical Beverly Hills housewife. Add a typical Beverly Hills husband. Then toss in one not-so-typical Beverly Hills bum.
My husband has brought a bum home.
And you've got all the makings for...
Guilt-free history. Wisdom. Mighty dogs.
Anxiety.
You've got Paul Mazursky's Down and Out in Beverly Hills. Starts Friday at a theater near you. Check local listings. Rated.
Oh, God, I love Down and Out in Beverly Hills. Now, this, I believe, was the first R-rated Touchstone movie. Am I mistaken there?
I'm not sure. I think Ruthless People might have been.
Oh, okay. I might be wrong. I had a vague memory that this was slightly controversial because Disney was making an R-rated movie, but I'm not sure.
No, you're right. It was. Down and Out in Beverly Hills is the first of those R-rated comedies.
And it's interesting that it was such a hit. And I remember that it was a huge blockbuster because I saw an anniversary screening of this movie in L.A., and Paul Mazursky and Nick Nolte were there, which was fantastic. And they were both complaining about how they thought the movie's advertising was mishandled and it didn't make as much money as it could have. And I was very surprised to hear that they thought that, because I remember it as being an influential blockbuster.
Yeah, it made over $60 million.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money, especially for the 80s. So I wonder what they were upset about. I should have asked, but I hate asking things at those Q&As because the people are always weird in the audience. This is a really seminal 80s movie. Nick Nolte plays a homeless man in Beverly Hills, and there are some really great scenes in the opening credits of him just kind of walking around in Beverly Hills getting snubbed that really, I mean, they're true. You see this all the time in LA, and it's one of the most uncomfortable, disconcerting things about it, this huge class difference that happens just on the streets. But not to get depressing, he decides to drown himself in the pool of Richard Dreyfuss and Barbara something else, played by Bette Midler, in their Beverly Hills mansion after his dog runs away from him, his beloved dog. And then Richard Dreyfuss is a guilty liberal Jew, so he decides to take Nick Nolte into his life, much to Bette Midler's horror and protest. And Nick Nolte shakes things up a great deal. And this, I believe, is actually a remake of the Jean Renoir film Voodoo Saved from Drowning, which is actually also a really, really great film, but it's transposed to Beverly Hills. And I think this is the first Paul Mazursky movie we're discussing on the podcast. Is that right?
Yes.
And I'm so excited to celebrate him because he is maybe my favorite director of all time and so underrated. And I've read in a filmmaker encyclopedia entry about him that one of the reasons he's sort of not thought of by most as one of the great 60s, 70s, and 80s, quote, auteurs, is that he didn't have a distinctive visual style, unlike somebody like Martin Scorsese or, Woody Allen. But I actually don't think that's true. I think that the interesting thing about Paul Mazursky is that his talent was at really capturing the time and place that he was focusing on. And his visual style adapts from film to film. He doesn't have certain camera movements or editing tricks that he does over and over again. But every one of his movies is just so rich with detail about the atmosphere that he's focusing on. And that is nowhere more true than in Down and Out in Beverly Hills, where he just captures Beverly Hills and LA in the 80s perfectly. The clothes, the furniture, just every nuance. It's so rich and delicious to take in. And that's one of the reasons I think I can watch this movie over and over and over again. The cast is perfection. Nick Nolte is great. This is one of Bette Midler's maybe more understated satiric performances, and she's I just love her in it. I love her reactions are priceless. I love the scene where she's trying to explain to Nick Nolte why she's a good liberal person and she has sympathy for the homeless, but she can't have him in her house, and then just loses it and then walks away. Oh, it's so great. Richard Dreyfuss is his usual, cute self. And I love this movie. I didn't appreciate it as much when I was younger because it's not ha-ha funny like Ruthless People or Outrageous Fortune. But to me, it's one of the ones that's aged the best. Its kind of satire is very on point.
Mm-hmm.
So what about you?
Yeah, that's exactly why I like the film. The satire, the social commentary, mixed with all the wonderful performances and characters, make for such a wonderful movie. For its 2-hour running time, you get so much out of it. It's so satisfying seeing these characters, seeing Nick Nolte's character arc and how he's affecting everybody else in the movie. Bette Midler, like I said, understated performance. She spends a lot of the movie just being annoyed, but she does it in such a fun way.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a fine line being an annoying or annoyed character in a movie, but she's so likable at the same time. And it's again a movie about rich people. I mean, might be a turnoff, but the characters again are so likable. You like Richard Dreyfuss. You want him to really befriend Nick Nolte's Jerry's character and go on an adventure of self-discovery. And I love the scene where they're hanging out. He's hanging out with the bums by the pier. It's such a fun scene because it could be sad and depressing, but it's actually fun. And I like the song the bums sing. Here it is.
One more time. We are the bums. Everybody say it. We are the homeless.
So right there,
even that is a kind of satire of celebrity liberal lunacy. I just think of the making of the We Are the World video. I don't know if you've seen it, which shows them all showing up in their stretch limos to record the song for starving African children.
Yeah, it's just the idea of the rich and the celebrities in Beverly Hills succumbing to the whims of a homeless man is a great premise, and it was based on that Renoir film. But I think, and I like the Renoir film, but first I will always return back to this movie because there's so much fun to be had. Paul Mazursky, like you, is one of my absolute favorite directors. He made one of my, I would say, top 10 films of all time, An Unmarried Woman. I know you love that movie as much as I do, probably.
My number one favorite movie of all time.
There you go. And he also made a movie called Willie and Phil, and that I really like a lot. It's pretty underrated. And quite a few movies over the years. Enemies Love Story. I can go on and on. But he's such a great director. And like you said, underappreciated or undervalued because his style wasn't as flashy as some of the others, but he did have his own style. He cared a lot about the screenplay. He cared about the characters and the actors, and that's really important in a movie. You have to care about who's on the screen and how they relate to each other and the journey they go on. And I know that sounds kind of like a lot of BS, but it's important in a comedy or a drama. And this movie has both elements, but it definitely blends them together. Like, you feel, like I said earlier, you feel like you've been through something when you watch this movie. And when it begins and ends with that Talking Heads song, you just leave with a smile on your face. And this is a movie that introduced me to the Talking Heads, so I'm very thankful of that.
It's performed important cultural work. I also want to say, I forgot to say before, I love that this movie gives you like a tour through all the bizarre 80s rich people I don't know if trend is the word, or fads, like walking on hot coals and swamis and dog psychiatrists and just all of these things, which I'm obsessed with. And I'd probably do all of those things if I had a lot of money. Ashrams. One of my favorite lines in this movie, or maybe any movie ever, is when Nick Nolte's like, "Oh, when I went to an ashram, blah, blah, blah." And Bette Midler says, "You've been in an ashram." It's just, that's one of her best delivered lines, in my opinion, of all.
That's a great line. Is there anything about the movie you're not in love with? I was thinking that the Tracy Nelson, the daughter character, something about her character never really gelled with me. Maybe because she was a little bit entitled and she was an anorexic, and maybe she wasn't as developed as a lot of the other characters. She kind of floats in and out of the movie a bit. And then she strikes up a relationship with Nick Nolte's character late in the movie, and then you're supposed to believe that they're in love or something by the end of the movie. I just felt that maybe wasn't the truest moment of the movie. But
no, I totally agree with that. It seems very forced. And I've always felt that her character was underdeveloped, which is a shame because the son, I forgot to mention the queer son, is actually very developed, and I love the attitude that his parents have towards him. They're not oppressive and they're not shaming. They're exasperated. But I always thought that was very quietly progressive. Even though, actually, this movie, I should mention, one thing I don't know that I like about it. Vito Russo, the gay activist and film historian who wrote The Celluloid Closet, who loved both Paul Mazursky and Bette Midler, and was very upset that Bette Midler kind of renounced her gay fans, arguably, when she became famous because of Touchstone. Well, partly because of Touchstone. He really criticized this movie because there's a joke where Richard Dreyfuss is performing CPR on Nick Nolte, and she says, "Oh, don't do that, you'll get AIDS." And, I think she would have argued that it's something the character would have said. It is part of the satire, and I agree. I think that is probably what the character would have said, but Vito Russo's argument was that the many gay fans of her, in particular, who were dealing with the trauma and the horror of AIDS in the mid-'80s, didn't need to go to a lighthearted, funny movie and have that thrown at them. And I don't know that he was wrong. So that's one thing about this movie that I'm torn about, that moment, because I know how much it hurt him. And I love Vito Russo. I worship him. And I can imagine that. I can imagine that a lot of gay people struggling with the AIDS crisis in 1986 would have gone to see this movie for a little bit of escape, and that would have been very hard to hear.
Right.
So that's one thing. Those are two things about the movie that I could maybe do without.
Another thing was it inspired the TV series from Fox the following year. Did you ever see it?
No, I just saw that commercial you posted, and it looks really atrocious.
Yeah, it was pretty horrible in every single way.
Did you watch the whole series?
I didn't watch the whole series, but I remember watching it in '87 when it premiered because I was excited. I loved the movie, and wow, a TV show of one of your favorite movies, exciting. And then when you watch it, it takes like everything that you love about the movie and just makes it into it was basically a Married with Children kind of clone, which is weird.
Yeah, Married with Children is very far from Down and Out in Beverly Hills.
Yeah. It just didn't work at all, and it wasn't funny at all. But it had Anita Morris in it as the Barbara character, which was a nice crossover to see.
I thought that was really funny that there's this weird, like, Anita Morris as Bette Midler's double thing going on in 80s movies. Like, I'm amazed that Anita Morris didn't replace Bette Midler in True Beverly Hills instead of Shelley Long.
Right. So that was Down and Out Beverly Hills, one of my favorite Touchstone movies, and one of yours.
Yes.
So let's move on to my number 4. Now, I don't have a trailer for this movie. It's there's no trailer for it, but I'm going to play something else in its place. You might recognize the sound of this.
That just makes me feel so safe when I hear
Music to our ears.
Somebody told me, and I amazingly never observed this over all the years I've been watching these movies, that the Touchstone, the little gold squiggly, is Mickey Mouse. Did you know that?
What? No, I did not know that.
Yeah, he heard that somewhere. When I looked at it, you can kind of see it. Like, it looks like a weird, scrunchy gold Mickey Mouse. I mean, what did you think the logo was when you were watching it growing up?
I guess a lightning bolt?
Yeah, I kind of thought that too, and maybe it is. But I don't know. It might be a lightning bolt Mickey. If anybody,
that's pretty cool.
Right in.
I know when they initially created the Touchstone logo, they had to throw something together. So maybe because they had Disney stuff on it, they just threw in a Mickey Mouse as a homage to the studio. And that's fun. So my number 4 is a movie I could not find a trailer for because this movie pretty much doesn't want to exist anymore for some reason. It's Offbeat, starring Judge Reinhold. Plot-wise, it's about a wacky yet meek librarian who moonlights as one of New York's finest to help his cop friend out, who is stuck auditioning for a charity dance sponsored by the police department and city of New York. And then, much to his cop friend's chagrin, he ends up getting a lead role in the show and falling for one of the dancers, played by Meg Tilly. And then, of course, big city crime, burgeoning love, hijinks, and ensue, which lead up to the big dance number towards the end of the film. Now, we covered dance movies before on our first podcast. Offbeat's kind of another one.
Yeah, I realized
not a
that.
full-fledged one, but it's you can kind of call it a dance movie in a way. And because it's a movie that hasn't been released much since it came out in April of 1986, it actually was a box office flop, which is part of why it's not as prolific as a lot of his other movies. It made like $4.8 million, which doesn't seem completely horrible considering a lot of movies have made a lot less and gone on to become cult hits. But it was a flop for Disney, Touchstone, so they kind of swept it under the carpet a bit. It was on VHS, and you could probably see the VHS in most video stores. It was like a bright yellow cover with a wacky image of Judge Reinhold holding, I think, Mick Tilly in a dancing position. I don't have the VHS anymore. I used to have it. I do have a Region 2 DVD from the UK where it's only available, but that looks like basically a copy from the VHS anyway. It's an underdog movie. It's a New York City movie, which I'm always drawn to, so that's probably what initially drew me to the movie, because I wouldn't say I was a huge Judge Reinhold fan in the 80s. I liked Beverly Hills Cop a lot, and Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and I saw him in Ruthless People that year, but I hadn't yet discovered the magic of Judge Reinhold in the 80s. But he's really appealing in this movie, and I will say that I'm a huge fan of Meg Tilly, who's in the movie as the love interest / tough cop that he gets with. And part of what draws me to the movie is Meg Tilly. I think she's great. I try to watch anything she's in. And I know she retired from acting in the 90s, but came back the last few years in a Canadian TV series called Bomb Girls, which I enjoy and recommend you guys checking out. It's a period drama show that I'm not sure what I think it might air on the Reels channel. Someone had alerted me of a Meg Tilly series, so I had to, of course, immediately look it up. And I really liked it, and I like her in this movie. She's essentially miscast as a tough cop, but I think she pulls it off. There's a scene in particular in this movie where one of the cops says something really sleazy to her. I think it's at Katz's Deli, and she just square punches him in the face, and you kind of believe it. And he backs off and kind of feels emasculated and leaves. And I think that's the James character played by James Tolkien, that bald character who was you might know from the Back to the Future movies. It's a, like I said, New York movie, and there's a lot of great New York stuff in it. And it's a very low-key movie. It's not a movie that's about big scenes. There are some big moments in the movie, but I think within those big moments, there's a lot of smaller scenes, a lot of quiet scenes of characters kind of relating to each other, and some quiet dialogue passages between them, and I really dig that about it. It's maybe not the most obvious movie to go for a Touchstone title, and it feels a little different from the pack. But I kind of wanted to throw it in there because it is such an underdog movie, and it has such a great cast too. Besides the two leads, like I said, there's James Tolkien, and then you also have Joe Mantegna as a really sleazy cop. You have John Turturro popping up as a kind of a very tight-ass boss for Judge Reinhold. He works at the New York City Public Library. And you have like character actors like Harvey Keitel and Victor Argo showing up later in the movie, and then you have like Julie Bavasso, who played Tony Manero's mom for Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive. She's there. She's great. You have Penn without Teller. Anthony Zerbe, Fred Gwynn, Austin Pendleton, Mike Starr, even Chris Noth from Sex and the City pops up.
I couldn't believe that he was a baby.
Yeah. So there's like a ton of people in this movie, and it's a movie about the characters and rather than situations. Even though it's a high concept comedy about a cop masquerading, and I have to say I have to love a movie about a masquerade. Most of my favorite movies from the 80s seem to be about a masquerade, and this is one of them. What are your thoughts about
this movie? Took me pleasantly by surprise because I did not I had to rent a VHS burn from my video store because that was the only place I could find it, but I didn't read the back cover. And I'd only read, I think, the review in the Leonard Maltin book or something, and it said, a librarian goes undercover as a cop, and I was like, oh, that sounds a little bit like it's going to be boring. I had no idea that the reason he was going undercover as a cop was to be in a dance show. I mean, that was really very pleasantly surprising, and that's so fucking 80s. Like, only going undercover as a cop and being in a dance show, those are just maybe the two most 80s things ever. It's an interesting New York movie because until the scene in Cat's Delicatessen, I wasn't even sure if it was shot in New York. It's weird. Like, the library, you could tell, was the New York Public Library, which I was surprised by, that they could be photographed in there. But a lot of the exteriors just don't look like New York. Even Lincoln Center doesn't totally look like Lincoln Center to me, and I wasn't sure what that was all about. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure. Maybe it's part of the intimate directing by Michael Dinner. Like, he had previously made a New York movie called Heaven Help Us, which was set in Brooklyn, but it wasn't really about the locations as much. It was more about the characters. So maybe the focus was more on the actual actors and characters rather than the locations. So that's why maybe they didn't come across as much as they did. I'm not sure. This movie was edited by Dee Dee Allen.
That was crazy when I saw that. I was like, wow.
So who would you argue?
High octane going on here. It's interesting. I usually pride myself on loving movies that don't just show, like, the Empire State Building and Times Square or whatever. But this one was so subtle that even I was a little bit floored. I really loved this movie. I agree with you. It was totally charming. Judge Reinhold, as a romantic lead, is not something you usually or ever see. And I thought it really worked. I was like, oh, he is a romantic lead. Like, who wouldn't want to fall in love with Judge Reinhold? And I did very much enjoy seeing Meg Tilly playing a tough, self-sufficient bitch, because not a bitch, a tough, self-sufficient woman. Listen to me, that's some subtle sexism going on there. But I'm used to watching her in The Big Chill over and over and over again, where she's kind of like the... Well, at first, for most of the movie, you think she's the ditzy, shallow hanger-on, even though that reveals itself not totally to be true. So I really liked seeing her in this role, and I thought she was great. I thought she was perfect, and she was very beautiful, too. I was saying to you before we recorded this, that something about the whole movie seems off to me, not in a bad way, just there's a weirdness about the tone. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's that it's such a low-key movie with such a crazy high-concept plot. I think that might be part of it. I think there's very little scoring in the movie. I don't know if you noticed that. There are a few montages with music, but a lot of it is just, there's not. And that seemed very strange for a Touchstone movie.
And it was James Horner, too, who did the score.
What did you say?
It was James Horner who did the score, too.
Which is very wild. I mean, did you notice that, or was that just me?
Yeah, there's a lot of quiet moments in this movie. It's very interesting. I'm not sure if that was because they had a lack of a score by James Horner, like a produced score by him, or because they actually chose to have a lot of quiet moments. I don't know.
Yeah. So I could totally see, even though I liked this movie a lot, why it wasn't very successful. Like I can imagine that even in the 80s that people would be like, oh, let's go see the new Judge Reinhold movie where he goes undercover as a cop to be in a dance show, and it's a very like quiet character study. Those things gelling. But for me, I mean, you can't get much better than that.
Yeah. And that's the fun of it. It's like it sets you up as one thing, it becomes another thing. And I like that the third act becomes kind of essentially Dog Day Afternoon. It's set in the bank, and he's being held up by Harvey Keitel and Victor Argo.
Now, I don't know about the banks in the New York area in the 80s, but I never saw a bank with an organist, even though there is one in this film.
I remember banks in the 80s, because the economy being so bad, they would try whatever they can to get people to come to the bank, and having an organ or a piano or someone doing something, playing music or giving away something was a big thing in the 80s in New York. And that's a weird touch that I didn't expect from a movie like a high concept studio movie in the 80s, to have these little touches. And especially like the little touch of Harvey Keitel having a rabbit's foot on his gun, which is a very like Brooklyn thing you probably would have done, because all those guys would have some sort of Lucky Charm with them. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of weird little touches in the movie like that, that at first glance seem kind of like out of nowhere, but actually do make some sort of sense within the context of its New York framework. And kind of appreciated that. It's also a movie you have to see on multiple viewings, I think. I think its kind of quiet charm kind of sneaks up in you a bit, and you appreciate it a bit more on a multiple viewing. Especially like the ending, which is, at first glance, kind of really underwhelming, because it's like it has the whole thing in the bank, and then you expect some sort of big resolution between him and Meg Tilly, but it's like a really quiet moment when they're on stage in the dark, and he's talking to her, and he's professing his love for her, and it's all like resolved within shadow. And the cinematography was by Carlo De Palma, by the way, another icon from Antonioni and Woody Allen, and it's done in that shredded in darkness, and it's in quiet, and then they have the musical number, which isn't really over choreographed. It's kind of, everyone's not actually a great dancer.
Yeah,
Judge Reinhold is not a good dancer at all.
Dance, yeah.
And you expect something bigger maybe, but it kind of ends on a more quiet note, and it's not going to appeal to everybody, this movie, and that's why I kind of wanted to include it, just to give it some love. Actually, let's take a break.
Okay.
And we'll be back to you right after this.
This is my high school.
You could at least acknowledge my existence. I think this is easy for me. I know I was an asshole to you and to thousands of others. But Kenneth, it's you I gotta straighten this out with. You shit on my house. No. You shit on my house!
Okay, so we're back. Hope you enjoyed that. Here's Ben's number 3.
Lucy Chapman had it all. A wonderful home, a handsome husband, a loyal dog. Unfortunately, she also had a giant South Korean chicken ball. A chicken ball that ended it all. That was a year ago. But thanks to her sister's magic... something incredible's happened.
Hello again.
Lucy's come back from the dead.
Hello. I'm Lucy Chadman.
You're dead.
Dead.
D-E-A-D.
Let's go say hello. You can't say hello. He was at your funeral.
What is going on, Sally? Did you put funny herbs in my tea? This is insane. Who are you? How are you? What am I doing in this dress?
Mom, I don't think you've realized the importance of what's happened to you.
It's earth-shattering.
It would change the way people look at life.
By any chance, do you know what's happened on Knots Landing?
Shelley Long is Lucy Chadman.
Lucy who?
And Lucy Chadman's life just hasn't been the same since her death.
Sometimes you can get incredibly powerful vibrations from old braziers, but yours just had a slight hum.
Hello again.
God, I love that movie so much. Now, is it my imagination, or did I hear a few little tidbits on there that weren't actually in the movie?
I don't know. I have to go back and listen to it again.
I don't remember that line from Knots Landing actually being in the movie, but I could definitely be mistaken. I would totally invest that too if I had died for a year in the 80s and come back. I would have honestly all about Knots Landing, Dynasty, Falcon Crest, Dallas. That would have taken all my time. There would have been no time to get into the adventures that Lucy gets into in this movie. So, hello again. You know, the 80s, when comedies could still be about magic. They just don't make movies like Hello Again now. So this is another high-octane group of filmmakers behind the scenes. Susan Isaacs wrote the screenplay. I think it was Susan Isaacs. She also wrote the book and maybe the screenplay for Compromising Positions with Susan Sarandon, which is another great New York housewife movie.
Also from the same director.
What did you say? Sorry.
Also from the same director.
Yeah, exactly, and directed by Frank Perry, who is so great, and another underrated 60s and 70s auteur. I think he's most well-known these days, probably for Mommy Dearest, which is actually... I love that movie, but it's probably one of his least well-directed movies. He also did in the 60s David and Lisa, and then in the 70s The Swimmer and Last Summer. And there's another movie that I really love that he did from the 60s or 70s, and I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, so he made this. I read a great book about what an asshole he was that his wife, Eleanor Perry, who collaborated with him before their divorce, wrote, called Blue Pages, which, Michael, if you haven't read it, it's an awesome, scathing book about Hollywood in the 70s. But sorry, I'm going all over the place. So hello again. As the trailer sort of suggested, Shelley Long plays a rich housewife in Connecticut, I think.
I think it's Long Island, but I'm...
What was it?
I think it's Long Island. But
you know what? I think it is Long Island. You're right. Jason made that correction while we were watching the movie, and I said, oh, it's Connecticut. She's married to Corbin Burnson, and you know that's not going to go well for her because it's Corbin Burnson. And then her sister, the fabulous Judith Ivey, who's another one of the great Touchstone character actors who just steals the show. She plays a psychic, and she has this awesome, like, magic tea tarot cardy Stevie Nicks store in New York City, which I would have lived at if this is one of the great Touchstone apartments, even though it's not Hello Again has several very, very good Touchstone apartments.
Amazing.
But unlike most of them, which are very glamorous and filled with weird abstract modern art, Judith Ivey's apartment is very homey and witchy, and I wanted to live in it so badly. So anyway, Shelley Long chokes and dies on a Korean chicken ball, and then Judith Ivey resurrects her a year later, and she finds that her husband has been stolen by her beautiful, bitchy, social climbing best friend, Celia Ward. Also, bad news. You never want to go up against Celia Ward in anything, especially for a man. And she also meets a handsome doctor, played by the very, very charming and gorgeous Gabriel Byrne, who's the only person who believes that she's not lying, that, she didn't just somehow fake her death to get attention, which is, I think, what Celia Ward claims she did. So there are lots of adventures. This is a super New York Touchstone movie. Very, lots and lots of glamour. I love at the beginning when Shelley Long's husband, Corbin Burnson, is kind of a social climbing plastic surgeon, and he drags her to all these socialite parties that she can't stand. And I totally identify with her, because whenever I go to a party, I feel that way. And Carrie Nye is the hostess, who's another amazing character actress. She was also in Creepshow in the Father's Day sequence. She has that great husky voice, and she was married to Dick Cavett, which is the most gorgeous coupling I can ever imagine. So this movie is really perfect. This is another movie that I hadn't seen in years, maybe longer than any of the other Touchstone movies. I just, for some reason, had not seen it in a long time, and I was afraid that it wouldn't be up to snuff, but it is just fabulous. It made me so happy to watch it. Shelley Long, she's unbeatable. Nobody could beat her. She has so much warmth and so much, and she's just so funny. She's such a brilliant actress and comedian, and I miss her so much. So I think those are my opening thoughts on Hello Again. What do you think?
No, I agree on all those points. Shelley Long immediately comes to mind. She is a big part of why this movie works. And at first glance, her character is very down to earth, which you would think is the opposite of Shelley Long, and like her character on Cheers, being the high-strung Diane character. But she uses some of the elements and makes such a likable, down to earth character that you like. She's not quite Judith Ivey down to earth in this movie, or up in the spiritual sky, but she's great. I mean, pairing her and Judith Ivey together was a wonderful choice by the casting people, gods. They work so well together as sisters. There's some resemblance, but you just kind of buy them as sisters, as almost opposites, but who have a real connection with each other. And again, going along with the actors, Gabriel Byrne's really great here. There's a genuine chemistry between her and Shelley Long, which is kind of weird to think, like Gabriel Byrne and Shelley Long, but having chemistry, but it works. And Celia Ward as the evil fashion designer friend. Another movie about a person in fashion who kind of disrupts the lead character, and a plot revolving around fashion.
Yes.
I love that. It's so essential in the 80s. I like that her friend, I think it's Kimmy, right? The Celia Ward character. She steals her look while she's dead, and she makes it trendy. Like, how horrible of her friend. She steals her husband, and she steals her look and makes it kind of popular after she's dead.
The down-to-earth housewife look?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's just the pinnacle of rudeness.
And meanwhile, her lifestyle and her character is anything but down to earth.
No, yes. I mean, all of the outfits that Celia Ward wears, then later that Shelley Long wears when she comes back and kind of gets a makeover. Like, Lady Gaga, I think she stole all of her looks from this movie, and yet in Hello Again, we're not supposed to be thinking that they're weird.
Right.
They're just beautiful and avant-garde, and they are. I love them, but it's so bizarre, the Celia Ward and the dresses.
And like you said, it's a great New York movie. It's probably one of the best New York movies on this list. There's some really great locations. I mean, I absolutely love that street. I think it's the Washington Mews that her son lives on after she passes away, and he finds love with his chef girlfriend, and they live in the fabulous Washington Mews. Are you familiar with that block?
I don't think that I am, other than from this movie. I don't remember ever being there. Where is it?
It's amazing. It's near. It's actually in the heart of NYU, and I think they actually own basically all the houses that are in there now. There's a lot of language classes, I think, there. It's in the heart of NYU and downtown. It's a beautiful street. I love walking down. When I lived in Greenwich Village, I would walk through it all the time just because it takes you somewhere else. It transports you. And I love that's one of the locations. My wife actually, while we were watching this movie, my wife told me that I think it was either Bon Appetit or Gourmet Magazine famously tried to pass off a photo shoot on that street as Italy.
That's amazing.
But got caught. But that's the magazine world for you. I also love that this movie is a positive message about how much can happen in a year and how much you can make a life for yourself if you're unhappy, and how you could find love. And, you know, all the characters kind of pair off by the end in almost a typical romantic comedy way. And I know romantic comedies aren't a genre that everyone loves, but I think it's done really well here. I mean, because you care so much about the characters and the actors who play them. It's not insufferable to sit through. It's actually it's really pleasant, and they're fun. And I'm a huge fan of Hello Again. I think it has endless replay value. I get caught up in its magic, if you will.
Yeah, the minute it starts. And the score. We did talk about the score, which you found that amazing behind-the-scenes clip of.
Yes. You know, growing up in the 80s and watching all these movies, I got burnt out by a lot of the music that was in these movies. A lot of them were very sax heavy in the 80s, and I think for a while in the 90s where it was like so anti-80s score, calling it a dark period baby. But now I've just looked back at it with such fondness. I think those scores are just so much fun, and they immediately transport you to that time period. And and this score in particular really brings me back to 1987, watching this movie in the theater. The helicopter shot of going to I think it's the Queensboro Bridge, or 59th Street Bridge as they used to call it, as they're driving from Long Island into Manhattan. That great scene at night. Yes. And then the score over it is great. And that YouTube video that I found with the composer was a lot of fun to listen to. Just having listened to a composer whack nostalgic about a movie that's largely been forgotten or not cared about by a select few people. It's a great movie, and I like to watch it a lot.
There's one more thing I want to address. This was the first movie that I watched for our little marathon this time, where I noticed one of my favorite New York movie conventions, which is a very tall, thin woman walking a gigantic dog. Have you noticed how that is in like every movie about uptown New York?
Totally. It's always about like a dog, like a very sleek looking dog too. Yes. A dog that just screams like, I have money.
Yes.
That happens a lot, I'm sure in the Upper West Side and Upper East Side and certain places, but watching it film always it's always fun to see. All right, so that's Hello Again. Let's move on to my number 3.
Touchstone Pictures presents Bette Midler and Shelley Long at their most outrageous.
Rat woman!
Outrageous fortune.
That was the single biggest crock.
Rated R. One show sneak preview this Friday night. Check newspaper.
All right, so that was a quick TV spot for Outrageous Fortune. Plot-wise, it's Lauren and Sandy, played by Shelley Long and Bette Midler, respectively, are complete opposites who end up in the same acting class together. They totally hate each other, and they don't know that they also share a lover, played by Peter Coyote. And one day when he mysteriously dies, they are distraught, but find clues that he may not be dead after all. And then they're led on a wild series of adventures to track him down and hopefully find a friendship in the process instead of utter hatred. I think this was the perfect vehicle for Shelley Long's high-strung, uppity kind of character like she played on Cheers. It's also a pretty perfect vehicle for Bette Midler to play crass but also sexy, although she's bogged down in one of the really baggiest sweaters I've seen in a movie.
Yes.
apparently she was 3 months pregnant when she started filming this movie, so that's the reason why she wears that big orange sweater for most of the movie. But she's brash, she's loud, but she's also got a sexy charm about her, and that's why we like Bette Midler, and this is prime Bette Midler at her most foul-mouthed, R-rated. And that's another reason why I like the movie. Like Ruthless People, it's an R-rated comedy about these two women who kind of become friends despite their many differences. It starts off as a New York movie, kind of like, I would say like a daytime After Hours, because they're led on these series of adventures together.
Yeah.
Most of the movie is kind of daytime, and I thought that was kind of an interesting choice. And they lose their money, and they're trying to elude bad guys, and then it's all kind of started by a love interest, like Griffin Dunn's character was in After Hours. He saw a woman at a diner. I think the actors are so dynamic together. You know, they play their total opposite characters to the hilt, and I just love that about it. And I think from my research that learned that they actually really didn't like each other.
Yeah.
In reality, which is a running theme of these podcasts. We find out that these actors actually don't really like each other, but maybe that tension really was what makes it really work in the movie.
Totally, I think that's right.
There's a clip I have here from the Oprah Winfrey Show from 1988.
Oh yes, I was going to say you have to watch that clip. Perfect, play it.
I'm going to play it. Here we go.
Hi. You and Shelley Long were great together in Outrageous Fortune. I was wondering if you guys were going to work together again.
I don't think so.
No?
No, I don't think so.
Did you enjoy working with her?
It was pretty rough. It was rough. It was pretty rough. But she did a good job, I think. As it turned out, it was a very, very successful picture for both of us. And actually, you know, I have thought about working with her again. If the right script came along, I wouldn't mind.
Well...
But there's always you, Oprah.
I like how she backpedals a little bit.
And you can't see it because we just listened to it, but after Oprah says, well, she totally rolls her eyes. She was like having none of it.
Yeah, check out the actual video on YouTube. you might want to see those reactions. They're pretty priceless.
Poor Shelley Long. I don't think she wants to be as difficult as she apparently is.
You know, Shelley Long wanted to break away from Cheers, and that was a big thing in the 80s. It put her career at jeopardy, and she wanted to star in movies or try something different. And you can understand why, you know, she might have had detractors. But we love her, and we're going to defend her to her death here.
And I'm so glad she did leave Cheers, because if she didn't, we wouldn't have Hello Again and Outrageous Fortune and True Beverly Hills, and the world would just be a dire, dry, barren place.
Exactly. I was watching another video. I won't play the clip, I promise, but it was a Phil Donahue show where questions why she left Cheers and her reasons, and she basically states the same reasons that she was trying to try something different. She committed to Cheers for 5 years, and she fully lived up to her commitment. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to move on. And while some of the actors renewed their contracts after the 5 years were up, but she wanted something different, and we got some great fun movies out of it.
And we got Kirstie Alley on Cheers, which was also great.
And exactly. And I love Kirstie Alley too. I think a lot of the tension between Shelley Long and Bette Midler kind of happened because they vied for top billing throughout the production of the movie, apparently. And then when the film was a box office success, that kind of made it even worse. I think on the actual film print, Shelley Long's name is first. But when the film was such a hit, and Bette Midler had already been in Ruthless People and Down on Beverly Hills, which were huge hits, they put her name first. So
On the video or in the?
I think on the video, on the posters, on kind of the press for the movie, it suddenly was like a Bette Midler and then Shelley Long instead of the other way around.
Interesting.
So, yeah, so some of that. Another piece of trivia: Bette Midler was in a Beverly Hills movie, Down at Beverly Hills, which we discussed, and Shelley Long was in True Beverly Hills,
which Bette Midler was supposed to play that role.
Right. Which I think is a pretty ironic twist. Can I ask you...
stopped to think about what True Beverly Hills would be like if Bette Midler had played that role?
I don't know. I don't think I would have preferred Bette Midler, because I think it would have given her a very PG kind of role, which I don't really see Bette Midler in.
I think she would have been a much more biting, kind of cold Phyllis Neffler. Mm-hmm. I just don't know that would have been right.
Yeah. I'm glad Shelley Long took the role. Can I ask you what your favorite Beverly Hills movie is?
My favorite Beverly Hills movie of all time? Oh my god, that is such a good question. Let me take a moment. It's a cliche, but I think it probably is True Beverly Hills. That was such a central part of my... Oh, wait, no, God, but Pretty Woman. How does one decide? I think it's, for me, it's a tie between True Beverly Hills and Pretty Woman, because they just were California to me when I was growing up. And when I came to LA, I was just like, wow, it really is exactly like in those movies here, at least, in the areas where those movies took place. It still looks like that. I don't know that I can really decide between the two of them, though. They're both very iconic for me in different ways. What about you?
Initially I would have said something like Beverly Hills Cop, but I think I'm going to go for Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, that Paul Bartel film from 1989. Have you seen that?
I have seen it, and I really didn't like it. I was a lot younger, and I love Paul Bartel, so I'd like to see it again.
Yeah, you should check it out again. It might be one of those movies that you kind of have to get into, like on multiple viewings. It's really kind of out there.
I mean, what a cast!
I love that movie. It's one of my favorites. Going back to Outrageous Fortune, sorry for that little
tangent
there.
The problem with Touchstone movies is that they really connect us to every single other cultural thing of cultural importance. So it's really hard not to just talk about everything when you talk about Touchstone movies.
Totally.
But my thoughts on Outrageous Fortune, I love it. I will say, watching it this time, I liked the New York scenes more than when they go to Mexico and have their kind of cross-country adventure. Yes. Especially, I think the last 20 minutes get a little bit, a little road and a little draggy for me.
Yep.
But it's totally worth it for their chemistry. And even those last scenes have the scene where Shelley Long jumps over the cliff because of her 15 years of ballet. I mean, that's legendary and iconic. I love the fabulously 80s inappropriateness of the opening credits. It's just endless pictures of shoes. It works and it makes sense on an intuitive level, but only on an intuitive level.
I wonder how many guys walked into the movie theater, guys that are expecting an action movie, and then see the opening credits with shoes and clothing and just kind of walked out.
Yeah, totally.
I'm not getting someone jumping off from mountains and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They were like, wait, where's the part where they hang off a cliff that we saw on the poster?
Exactly.
But yeah, they had such great chemistry, and I totally identify with that little queen on the Oprah show who's like, when are you going to do a movie again? You were so great. And then she's like, no. It's too bad. Maybe if they'd gotten along, then Shelley Long would have played the Barbara Hershey role in Beaches, but that would have probably been a big problem.
Yeah. I don't know if I would have. That's a tough one.
Yeah. Although, I will say that Shelley Long was in a Beaches ripoff, a TV movie called A Message from Holly. She played the more Bette Midler-y character, but it was devastating, and I cried when I watched it on TV in 1990 or whatever it was on. So it could have worked, maybe.
She had her Beaches moment then.
Did, yes.
Good for her. Is it wrong that I want to see Ninja Vixens, the B movie that Bette's character apparently was in, rather than that Hamlet they do at the end of the movie?
Oh, no, yeah, totally. That's a perfect example of a movie within a movie that really should have been made.
Ninja Vixens. Please, someone do it.
I mean, Bette Midler needs a comeback. Why not now?
Yeah, exactly. That was Outrageous Fortune. Moving on to your number 2.
From Touchstone Pictures, Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin are about to meet Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin. They're two sets of mismatched twins in one outrageous comedy.
Two of everybody in there.
Big Business, rated PG.
Starts tomorrow at a theater near you. Check newspaper for showtime.
You know, I think that I remember seeing that TV spot. I first discovered Big Business through the commercials on TV, and just thinking like, oh my God, just being drawn to it like a moth to a flame. I don't think I even knew who Lily Tomlin was. And I don't know that I even knew who Bette Midler was, because I think that Big Business and Beaches were they in the theater at the same time?
Big Business was the summer and Beaches was Christmas.
Okay, because I remember seeing commercials at the same time. Maybe it was the theater commercials for Beaches and the video commercials for Big Business. I don't remember, but I remember
possible, actually, yeah.
They both. What did you say? Sorry.
That's very possible, actually. Yeah.
They both kind of hit my radar at the same moment, and I just remember thinking, "Oh my God, 2 of Bette Midler. That's so incredible." And so then I finally saw it when it came out on video. And that was a movie that actually I'm almost ashamed to admit it. I saw it after I saw Beaches, which was the first Bette Midler movie I ever saw, which revolutionized my life and which may or may not be discussed later. And I think I was a little disappointed by Big Business the first time I saw it. And looking back now, I can't even imagine how that could have been, because there's literally not a single flaw in this movie. But at the time, it didn't really hit for me. But over the years, I've come to just be obsessed with it. This movie, maybe more than all of them, Bette Midler seems to be having such a blast. Just being... I should say what it's about. It's a comedy about a corporation, which I'm always a big fan of, if it's from the 80s or the early 90s. And Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin played 2 sets of twins who were separated at birth and switched accidentally, so that Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin live in the sticks somewhere, one pair, and then the other pair, Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin, live in the city. And it's actually kind of a complicated story. I don't want to get into it too much, but basically, long story short, the corporate Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin are trying to buy up the country Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin's land and turn it into a golf course or something that they were always trying to do to the country in the 80s, some capitalistic greed thing. So Lily Tomlin and Bette Midler from the country, after having a hilarious fundraiser where Bette Midler milks a cow and yodels and dances, and it's just one of the best things that ever happened, they go to New York to negotiate with corporate Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin. But the corporate Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin don't know that they have twins, and there are a million misunderstandings and scenes where they almost walk by each other and get the same outfits, and it's mayhem. So that description probably gave you such a headache, because it actually gave me a headache to say it. But just trust me, you got to see the movie. It's really it's hilarious, and Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin are both so charismatic. And I rewatched it this time with my friend Maya, who is actually a scholar who's studying feminist filmmakers of the 70s, and she's interviewed Jane Wagner, Lily's partner, and we both just adore Jane Wagner and Moment by Moment, and we talk about that movie and Lily Tomlin all the time. And she pointed out that one of the great things about Big Business is that both actresses, Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin, who are both such unique comedians, they're both really known for their unique intonations and their ways of reacting and their physical comedy. They're just allowed to totally kind of be themselves and get to the core of what makes them funny. And yet they do it while playing these very different characters, and it totally works. They're just brilliant, and they have so much chemistry. I mean, I think Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin had as much chemistry as Bette and Shelley Long did in Outrageous Fortune. Even though apparently also Lily Tomlin was very upset on the set of this film, I recently learned, which I was sad to hear. It all takes place at the Plaza in the 80s, which is unspeakably glamorous. I mean, the outfits in this movie are incredibly awesome. There's yet another big dog with a skinny woman who you see like 15 times. It's almost like they're making fun of that convention. And interesting fun fact, Dean Cundy, the director of photography, I'm sure you know the exact title, or was it cinematographer for Halloween, who's obviously unspeakably brilliant, was also the cinematographer for Big Business. And I'm not surprised, because it is a really gorgeous movie to look at. So I love this movie. I think of all of the Touchstone comedies, this might be the one that makes me laugh out loud the most. All of Bette Midler's bitchy lines are so priceless, and I could truly probably watch it every day. And this is one of the few Bette Midler Touchstone movies that's on Blu-ray, and the Blu-ray's really gorgeous, and I just wish they would all come out so that I could be happy, because the DVD prints are notoriously lacking.
Yes, especially Hello Again, which I think I mentioned. Every time I watch it, it's hard to imagine that it looks even worse than the VHS print.
I think I've heard that for some reason the Touchstone did take care of their prints very well, because apparently Pretty Woman, it's like hard to find a 35mm print to screen, and I'm like, really? Of all movies, that one?
It's crazy.
So maybe there's some weird sketchiness going on there.
Yeah. Big Business, like you said, absolutely one of the funniest movies from Touchstone. I think it's I totally agree with you. I think a movie that's funnier on this list, because there's so many consistent laughs. It's like the most fun you'll have in like 98 minutes or less.
Yes.
It's once it starts going, it keeps going and going, and just until it ends. You get 4 great characters, two Bette Midlers and 2 Lily Tomlins. 2 actresses who are kind of on the exterior completely different and have, like I said, very different mannerisms and ways to go about their comedy, but they effortlessly blend and fit so well together. It's almost like, because you get 4 of them, it's like you should have paid twice to see this movie. Because you get so much for your dollar.
You almost feel you just don't deserve it, like you're not good enough to be watching it.
Exactly. And I know some people are just kind of mystified by the idea of Big Business being such a great movie, but you really have to give it a chance. It's just so much fun. It's another movie where the fashions again play kind of a big role in the movie.
There's a lot of discussion about the outfits. It's not just that they're outrageous outfits, they're constantly talking about them.
Right. It's like, what are you wearing today? Why are you wearing that? Did you change?
Exactly.
I don't know. I can't gush over this movie enough. I love screwball comedies from the 30s, especially, and I feel like this is like an 80s version of one. I know there's some satire underneath everything, because one of the Zucker brothers directed at Jim Abrams. So there's that element of satire, but it feels like something that could have come out of the 30s very easily.
Yeah.
It's a PG movie, so there's not a lot of rudeness in the movie, but there's a lot of really funny humor in it. There's a lot of really edgy humor in it, too. And I just really appreciate that. And I think Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin are glorious together in this movie, and I kind of wish they had I wish it was a Big Business, too.
The Big
More
Business
than any of these other
not
films.
Very financially successful, right? I vaguely remember it being kind of a flop, which is unthinkable.
Actually was a hit. It made $40 million. Okay, wow. Yeah, it wasn't as huge as some of the other Bette Midler movies, But $40 million in 1988 was a pretty good chunk of change. That could have been a sequel, but we didn't get one. Maybe it's because of the no love between the two of its stars.
I don't know that actually Lily Tomlin was unhappy because of Bette Midler. In the article I read, she was unhappy because of the gay characters, their representations, which I thought was interesting. She thought they were offensively represented, and she tried to get the filmmakers to change it, and I guess they wouldn't. But watching the movie, it actually almost seems like maybe she did succeed, because I didn't think the representations of the gay characters were very offensive.
No, I thought it was most welcome to have those characters who are so stock in those 30s movies, having those businessmen characters trying to set up some sort of deal, making them fun and making them partners in life. I think it was a lot of fun. I think they were really funny.
Yeah, together. That's it. And not in a rude way.
No, not at all. I think the Fred Ward scenes with them are pretty funny.
Oh, they're so
the
great.
Misunderstandings that they have are just adds to the greatness of the movie.
And so well played by Edward Herrmann, who I love, and I don't know who the third actor was, but very, very well done.
It's so well done. Like the movie, everything in the movie is kind of pitch perfect. It's another movie that could have been bogged down by its special effects because of the idea of taking two actors and making them into four characters.
Yes.
Is a big feat visually, and that's why you had a great cinematographer like Dean Cundey working on the film, because he was able to really pull it off. And it could have been distracting, could have been weird, but it's kind of seamless in the movie in a lot of ways.
It really is.
Yeah, it was made like over 25 years ago, and visually, even though there isn't CGI in it doesn't need it, because there's the split screen or whatever optic they used is so seamless.
It really could have been. This is another movie that easily could have fell into like the tedious, over-plotted territory, but it very smartly actually is not like that, and it is mostly, like you said. I think the great strength of this movie is that it's about so many things other than the narrative. It's about there are so many elements of each scene that are focused on, and that I think is why it's constantly entertaining. You're not the whole time laboriously like wondering, what's going to happen with this corporate scheme, even though that is an element. It's so much about the characters. And
it could have been really tedious because it, like you mentioned, it's filmed at the Plaza Hotel, or it's set in the Plaza Hotel, and just having it in that one, a bulk of the movie in that one location could have made it kind of tedious. But like those movies from the 30s, the screwball comedies, where a lot of the action was in one or two locations, they really just pull it off because the actors make it really work, and the editing is so sharp, and the pacing is so quick and fun. It's a movie that should be studied.
Yes.
Any other thoughts on Big Business?
I'm trying to think. I think I've said it all.
All right, let's move on to my number 2. Here we go.
Two undercover cops on the trail of an escaped killer, staking out the house of his unsuspecting girlfriend. I think she's gone on a diet. Everything was routine.
Lucy, you got some explaining to do.
Until one of them stepped out of line.
I was supposed to be watching the house, right? So I was watching the house from the inside.
Out of the shadows.
What a bozo.
And into the picture.
I don't believe this.
You like spicy?
I love spicy.
I'm gonna kill him.
You're nice.
I'm not that nice. Look, Maria, there are things about me that you don't know.
I don't know your name.
Bill.
Touchstone Pictures presents Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Estevez in a John Badham movie.
Did we practice safe sex?
Probably not.
Stakeout. Who says a little danger can't be a lot of fun?
Can I first start off by saying that I love that John Badham, he wanted his movies to be called movies, not films.
I know that.
Yeah, he he was like a special request from John Badham. I think later on in the 90s, even the prints of the movies had like a John Badham movie. I'm not sure. I think this movie might have had it too, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I think that's really cool, telling that how unpretentious a movie like Stakeout is. Plot-wise, it's about two cops who are assigned to watch a woman's house after her evil ex-boyfriend breaks out of prison and may be heading her way. And then one of the cops, which was played by Richard Dreyfuss, falls hard for the woman, Madeline Stowe, and she strikes up a relationship with her under the guise of being a friendly phone repairman. So right off the bat, it's another movie about a masquerade. Instead of someone pretending to be a cop, it's a cop pretending to be an everyday Joe, which I immediately am attracted to, obviously, and seems to be the plot of every 80s movie, thankfully. This movie came out at the height of the buddy action comedy, and with movies like Lethal Weapon and countless others in the same year and onward. This is so much fun in this movie. It's an action movie, it's a buddy comedy, it's a romance. It's got a lot of elements that come together pretty well. And I think what makes it work is Richard Dreyfuss at the center of it all. He's such a charming actor and character, and you're immediately drawn to him, and you kind of want him to even though he's masquerading and he needs to stake her out for his job, you want him to fall in love and find someone after his girlfriend ruthlessly kind of leaves him one day, comes home to an empty house. And he has a lot of good rapport with Emilio Estevez, an actor who doesn't immediately come to mind as one of my favorites, but I think they're really good together here, and I think they have a lot of fun. There's a lot of scenes where they're just like hanging out together, talking, and especially there's a scene where they play movie trivia to pass the time, because obviously being on a stakeout, watching somebody's house is laborious and takes forever, and not much happens, and they play a movie trivia game, and one of the questions is what line is "This is no boating accident" from, and obviously it's from Jaws, but Richard Dreyfuss' character doesn't know what it is. It's a fun little tribute to his role in that movie. And then Madeline Stowe was the love interest. Can I just say that I was sort of obsessed with Madeline Stowe around this time period when the film came out. Quite beautiful, very striking. Also, she had the same birthday as me, so I felt connected to her. Aidan Quinn as her evil boyfriend. He was really good. I think he replaced Val Kilmer, who apparently who dropped out right before the movie started shooting. So he had some Val Kilmer shoes to fill in, and he does a good job. Before I go into the film any further, what are your thoughts on Stakeout?
I had never seen it until you suggested that, that you told me it was going to be on your list. So I'm so happy that I did. I was very pleasantly surprised. I didn't know that Madeline Stowe was making movies in 1984. I think of her as a very 90s kind of phenomenon. So you have to tell me what else I've missed. I've always been obsessed with her. I think she's very, very striking and very, like you say, and very unique. Not just her beauty, but her way of being in films, her acting has a very unique quality. And this, dare I say it, might be Emilio Estevez's best performance, in my opinion. I'm not particularly crazy about him either. I don't think he's a bad actor. I think he's fine. I usually don't like the characters he plays.
Right.
So, but I thought that he was perfect for this movie. And it really did a great job. A better job than a lot of movies I can think of, seamlessly mixing the romance plot with the action movie. It's fascinating because it really is a romantic comedy where the conflict is that of an action movie, and it totally works. Madeline Stowe's character in this movie is fascinating because there's some crazy history there. Like, she's attracted to criminals and serial killers, obviously, and, like, she knows that. And I sort of wanted to... I both liked and didn't like that it didn't get into that more. Because I didn't like it because I was intrigued, but I did like it because, I mean, we probably wouldn't have learned more in, quote, real life, because this movie is such a realistic slice of life than we did in the movie. And she had fabulous chemistry with Richard Dreyfuss, even though I think she's probably a lot younger than him. But he's very believable, very attractive in this movie. I don't always think of Richard Dreyfuss as an attractive romantic lead type, like Judge Reinhold. But he is in this movie. He works.
Yeah, they have a great chemistry, which chemistry is a big word for a lot of these Touchstone movies, whether it's between two actresses or a man and a woman or whoever. It's very important to, and I think a lot of what they get right in Touchstone films is how these actors work well against who they're playing against. And I think he has a great chemistry with both Emmanuel Stowe and Emilio Estevez, and that's why part of the reasons why you go back to the film a lot is because you want to see those fun scenes between the two. You want to. I especially like to see that fun scene where he's masquerading as the phone man and he's trying to bug her phone, and then he's like, there's I think a scene where he's dancing in her apartment while she's listening to Gloria Estefan. It's such a charming little bit, and just Richard Dreyfuss dancing around to the music while he's like trying to masquerade as someone else. I think it was kind of funny, good character nuance.
Him too.
Yes, and like you said, like blending the action and comedy. I feel like so many filmmakers today could learn from watching a movie like Stakeout. Like, movies I feel like are either so serious, like these action movies are so serious, like walking into a Christopher Nolan movie, like 2.5 hour, 3 hour action movie, being bored because it's so serious, or walking into like the opposite spectrum, like a Michael Bay action movie where it's just so mindless and stupid for 2.5 hours. You see a movie like Stakeout, which runs like just around 2 hours, and it's just fun from beginning to end. Slam bang action for those who are into that, romance for those who are into that, and some funny moments, bonding moments between two guys, and you get a lot for the price of an admission. Like Big Business, it's another good deal. The sequel, on the other hand, you probably haven't seen that one.
I have not. No, I remember it.
Yeah,
but I never went to see it.
It just doesn't capture what this film does. I think it just tries to be bigger. There's like bigger explosions, and the action takes almost a backseat to the adding of the Rosie O'Donnell character.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of wisecracking. It just becomes not fun. Like this movie is. It kind of ruins the chemistry between the two actors, adding someone else, and sort of like what they did with the Lethal Weapon movies. Lethal Weapon 2 was a very great, it was a good sequel. But then later installments, they had Joe Pesci kind of popping up and kind of ruining the fun.
Yeah. I remember seeing Lethal Weapon 3 in the theater and just thinking it was one of the worst movies I'd ever seen. Or was it 4? It might have been 4. It was Lethal Weapon 3 or no, it was Lethal Weapon 4, I think.
Yeah, that was
so
terrible. And I think I've mentioned this before, I think on our dance podcast, that John Badham's a pretty underrated director. I know he's kind of labeled the hack, but he does a good job. He made some pretty great movies like Saturday Night Fever, War Games, and not everyone loves Short Circuit, but I love Short Circuit, Blue Thunder, and then Stakeout. Did you ever see his Dracula from 1979?
No, I didn't know that that's the one with, what's his name, the Frank Langella?
Yes, exactly.
I didn't see it. Is it good?
It's good. It's more of a visually interesting movie. It's really gorgeous to look at, actually. I would check it out.
It's funny because on one level you would not think that the person who directed Saturday Night Fever would be directing Stakeout, but they both have a real intimacy to them that you wouldn't expect, especially with Stakeout. It feels very small and intimate, which is strange for an action movie, but which really works.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's part of why we come back to these Touchstone movies, because they have that intimacy, like you mentioned, in these big studio, high concept comedies and action movies. There's a lot of focus on the characters and the actors. So
yes, and I miss that so very much.
Yeah. The writer of Stakeout also wrote Secret Admirer.
I like that movie too.
He also wrote stuff like The Hidden, Class, and The Boogans. I love The Boogans.
I've never seen The Boogans, even though the final girl from Silent Scream, which is one of my favorite movies ever, is in it. So I really should see it.
See The Boogans. It's another kind of intimate horror creature movie. It's like a monster movie, but you kind of like the characters so much, and the setting. It's very low budget. It's kind of a throwaway in a way, but I go back to it over and over because I like the characters and the actors. So yeah, the rhythm's gonna get me. Got me tonight. Watching.
Yeah, I keep being impressed by the music that is in these movies. They got some big hits. They were coughing up for the rights money. Although maybe it wasn't as much of a hassle to get the rights for songs at that time. I don't really know. No, it was though in the 80s. That was kind of the moment when that exploded.
It wasn't as bad as it is now. Movies are that's a part of why a lot of movies get held up on DVD and Blu-ray, because the music rights are so much money. But back then it was still not easy, but that's part of why they helped sell these movies with soundtracks.
Mm-hmm. And that song, they used the same song in Stakeout and Big Business, which I thought was interesting. Did you notice that?
I was going to say the same Steve Winwood song.
They must have really liked that at Touchstone.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Not one of my. I love it because of my associations of it with Big Business, but it's not a song I would listen to otherwise.
I think it works much better in Big Business than it does in Stakeout.
Yes,
Stakeout kind of seems out of left field. We just had the song. Let's throw it in. I don't know. All right, so that was Stakeout. Let's move on to our number ones.
Oh my God.
Here we go.
From the beginning, C.C. Bloom wanted to be a star.
That's the story of...
And Hillary Whitney was her biggest fan.
You're the best singer I ever saw.
You think I'm really, truly talented? I think you're truly talented. I've told you this at least 8 million times.
And with a friendship that began 30 years ago at the beach.
You just happen to be the most fantastic person I've ever met in my entire life.
I am?
They shared good times.
The Times says C.C. Bloom's performance is both promising and purposeful.
And bad times.
Mark! Have a drink on me. I was a big hit.
Touchstone Pictures presents Academy Award nominee Bette Midler.
But enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think of me?
Academy Award nominee Barbara Hershey.
You maniac! Are you always like this? No? Good. Then you can stay.
In a motion picture about relationships.
I'm a womanizer. You see, I'm not a liar.
I'll see you back home on Monday. You're lucky.
About laughter.
Go back, you brain-damaged bag of bones, or I'll have you gassed. Hi, Marge. How's life treating you?
About life.
Could be dead. Nah. If she was dead, she would have dropped the bottle.
Beaches.
I don't care.
Once in a lifetime, you make a friendship that lasts forever.
Yes. I feel like it's such a cliche for me to be choosing Beaches as my number one Touchstone film, but there's no other for me. It is the first Touchstone Pictures movie that I ever saw, I'm pretty sure. And it's just, I was 6 when it came out on video, and that's when I saw it. I don't know why. I think we had it around the house, or a friend brought it over, or something. And it's just, it's amazing to me that as a 6-year-old, I was so powerfully drawn to this movie. The minute that Mayim Bialik started singing The Glory of Love, I was just just drawn into it. And I don't even know, what about, this movie about these women's friendships in the 70s and 80s was so resonant for me, but I was transfixed, and I made my dad rent it for me and my mom over and over and over again. I remember once being at the video store with my dad and being like, I want to rent Beaches, and he was like, you've already seen that, and I was like, yeah, and like, so what? I want to see it again. One of the many mutual or misunderstandings we had over my love for movies over the years. Obviously, I don't know if I need to tell people, but it's the story of these two women who meet on a beach when they're little girls and are very different. Hillary Whitney comes from a very rich family. Bette Midler comes from, a working class, loud family in Brooklyn. Hillary Whitney's waspy. And they are pen pals for years, and they live together in Greenwich Village in the 70s. This movie's not fabulous with its period details, although I appreciate the subtle period details more the older I get, but it all kind of looks like the 80s a little bit. And then Hillary becomes a rich lawyer, Cece becomes a famous actress, and it's just about their trials and tribulations. And, doing this podcast, I realized there were a lot of movies about women's friendships and relationships that Touchstone did. And this was more of a thing in the 80s in general. And I really like that. I like that Hillary and Cece are both working professionals. They're both smart and independent. They have relationships, but they're not necessarily the most important things in their lives. Their lives aren't totally dominated by them. And then I think it's okay for me to give the spoiler that Beaches ends in tragedy. I won't say who dies, but somebody dies. Everyone knows somebody dies at the end of Beaches. A very unusual, sad ending in a Touchstone film. I can't think of any other Touchstone tearjerkers. But the world wanted a Touchstone tearjerker because this was a massive hit and it became immediately iconic and people make fun of it. It's one of the most cliche chick flicks ever made. But I think that, I always love chick flicks. I've always been a big fan of chick flicks. I will defend them endlessly. I do think that in the 2000s, the movies that came to be known as chick flicks, I stopped liking them as much because often they lacked the humanity that Beaches had. But I'm sorry, I know Beaches is melodramatic, and I know that The Wind Beneath My Wings was overplayed in the 80s and 90s. But I think that the chemistry between the two actresses, again, the chemistry is amazing. They're totally believable as these best friends, even though they're so different. The actresses give excellent performances. I think that Barbara Hershey's performance in this movie is underrated because it's less flashy and it's less iconic than Bette Midler. I mean, Barbara Hershey doesn't get to sing Otto Titsling and have amazing... This is a great hair movie for Bette Midler. Let me just say that I try to accept when my favorite actors and actresses change, and I don't want to define anybody by their hair. But Bette Midler's hair in Touchstone, the big red hair, I sometimes think that there were powers held in that hair. And when it became short and blonde in the 90s, something changed irrevocably. Yes. I just want that big red hair back. And I know it'll never happen, but it's okay. So this is another great New York movie. The New York mise-en-scène is terrific. Both of Bette Midler's apartments, her kind of cheap Greenwich Village apartment with all of the pictures of her around it is one of the great apartments of all time. And certainly her Manhattan apartment, her uptown Manhattan apartment when she gets famous, which is all red, black, and white and has one of those crazy Warhol portraits of Bette side by side, four of them, is very, very iconic.
Does Shelley Long have that in True Beverly Hills? I seem to recall that, but I could be wrong.
No, she has it in Irreconcilable Differences. Oh.
Yes, I knew it was Shelley Long, but
Shelley, we knew there was if I ever had money for art, what I would want to collect were those pseudo Warhol prints of actresses in 80s movies. Sigourney Weaver also has one in Working Girl.
Oh yeah. Yes.
So I will say, though, that even though I love this movie, I love the songs, in addition to the cliche sappy songs, there's also crazy-ass Oh Industry, Ben Midler's big modern dance number, which is totally the best, and which I think my sister was afraid of when we were little, which I love remembering. I even though I adore it, and it will always be one of my favorite movies, I actually can't really watch it that much anymore because, you get older and you realize that people who you love do get sick and die when they're young, and people lose their parents when they're young, and the tragedy of it is actually too much for me. Watch it, rewind, and friendships, they can be fraught, and they come and go in a way you don't realize when you're young. So watching it again for the podcast, I actually turned it off 45 minutes before it was over because I didn't want to have to go to the end.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how as I get older, I've really found it harder to watch. But it will always be my favorite Touchstone movie of them all.
Like you said, it's very much known as the cliche chick flick, and by all rights, I should not be into beaches, but I have to say I am. I mean, there's a power in this movie. It may be, Hollywood being manipulative or whatever, but some of the best movies are like that. And I don't care about that. I want to go along for the ride. I want to hang out with Bette Midler and Barbara Hershey for 2 hours and see their struggles, their friendships and their relationships. I like that it's a movie about two friends, and but it's also very much about a performer and how her life around her is affected by her drive for success. That's an interesting element that a lot of other chick flicks might not have. It's why can't a guy enjoy this movie? It's about friendships. We all have friendships, and guys may not be so intimate with the details about their friendships. They may not share as much as some of the things that the characters of this movie do, but you can relate to it. And when Wind Beneath My Wings does kick in later in the movie, and the character does die, you can't help but cry and feel really bad for what happened.
Yes.
I almost want to dare you to not, because there's so much history. The movie's about the history between two characters, and then when one of them dies, and has a child involved, I feel like that's especially potent in a way. Leaving behind someone who's so helpless or doesn't really understand it, whether it's a child or an animal, it's really effective. And this movie is really sad, like you said. It's hard to watch towards the end, but it's also in a way uplifting because towards the end, I like one of the characters, without trying to give away too much, one of them
Maybe we could just ruin it. I mean, who the hell listening to the Touchstone podcast hasn't seen Beaches? I would be really surprised.
Yeah. So, spoiler, Barbara Hershey's character who has a child dies. But before she does, she has a conversation with Bette Midler, and the conversation culminates with Bette Midler saying, "I know all there is to know about you," and then Barbara Hershey's character says, "I'm counting on it," because she knows she's dying, and she knows that she wants to relate all their experiences together and pass it along to her daughter, and that's completely heartbreaking.
Yeah, it totally is.
And it's hard to not well up and feel those emotions, and there's so many other little things in the movie, like when she does her performance art, that scene, which is so bonkers and funny. I feel like in the 80s and 90s, there's always that prerequisite scene of doing performance art in Soho or some sort of play that no one wants to go see, and it's so horrible, but somehow you can't take your eyes off of it.
My favorite example of that ever maybe is and I won't go too much into The Slaves of New York, which is actually a movie I find pretty boring, but there's a performance art scene with a guy is on a motorcycle while a woman is in a cauldron filled with vegetables, like singing opera, and I'm just like, oh, that is so great.
That was, I think, that was around the same time period, 88, 89.
I think that's right, yeah.
Very late 80s, early 90s thing to do. This movie's clearly tailor-made for Bette Midler. I mean, he exploits her gift for acting and for her singing, and I can understand why it's well loved and well liked by everyone who's into it.
You said
So
that
give it a
part of
chance.
the movie.
Done.
You said that part of what makes the movie so moving at the end, and this is, I think, is something that people don't talk about. Everyone talks about, it's so shamelessly manipulative, and the song, and it is. I mean, it is unbelievably pushes your buttons in a shameless way.
Yeah.
Even though it's powerful and it's getting at something real, it is exploitative. But it's their history, and the movie's only, I think, 2 hours long, but that history, you feel like you've lived it with them. And this moment, actually, when I watch it now, that moves me the most in those last scenes is not the big scenes everyone thinks about, even though those scenes are moving, but it's when Bette Midler is just sitting in Hillary's apartment reading the letters after all that time. That just really gets me, just reliving all of those moments when they were together as friends. Oh God, I get sad even just thinking about it now. And that, I think, is what I think is legitimately good about it, that it conveys the pretty complex history between these women in a way that I think is convincing and that I don't think is very contrived, even though there are elements of the movie that seem contrived. I love it. I think it's great. I appreciate it. I felt a little bad making you watch it because I know that, for a straight man, having to watch Beaches is like torture. But I know that you're not the norm when it comes to your cultural sensibility. But Beaches can be trying for the most sensitive of people.
I love melodrama, and I love sometimes when characters are being completely bitchy with each other. Let me play the scene from Beaches.
Okay.
And see if you remember it.
For God's sake, don't you get it? We've grown apart. Happens to the best of friends. It's happened to us. We might as well face it. You're ridiculous. I'm ridiculous. We haven't grown apart. You've fallen apart. I don't think I care to pursue this. So long, Cece. Why care? Stuck-up little witch. When your father died, he took the best of you with him. Look, don't make a scene, all
You
right?
tried to be an interesting person for a while, but look at you now. You've completely reverted to type. You're nothing but a small-minded, tight-ass little snob these days.
How would a pretentious little climber like you know that?
Experience.
Experience?
And I know what's eating you, too.
Oh, really? What's eating me?
Plain old-fashioned jealousy.
Jealousy? Jealousy? What am I jealous of? Your insane ambition? No, it must be your new money. No, I'm jealous of your marriage of convenience. That must be it.
My what?
Aren't you afraid you got him by default?
Maybe I am. But at least I belong to myself, which is more than I can say for you. I'm doing what I set out to do, remember? I'm living the life you didn't have the courage for. So don't give me you're not jealous. You're so jealous you can hardly breathe.
I love that you included that whole thing. Every
I had
second
to.
is so priceless.
Maybe it's telling of my childhood, but I was raised by a woman. I was raised by my grandmother, and I understand, and I lived with my younger sister, and I understand how women can be with each other sometimes, and I think this movie really gets that. There's an intimacy there, and there's history between characters and women, and they sometimes will say such horrible things to each other, even though they absolutely love each other at the same time. It just, most people are like that, but chick flicks sometimes really pick up on that, and I feel like a scene like that kind of brings it out and shows you how women can be with each other. And Beaches is one of the better films to exploit it.
I was raised around a lot of very strong women also. My mother, my grandmother, my Aunt Jen, and my sister. And I think one of the reasons I have the taste in movies that I do is because many of the movies I was taken to are the ones my mom wanted to see, which were, the 80s and 90s chick flicks and the Barbara Streisand movies and the Julia Roberts movies and Ben Midler movies. So I know, I totally agree. I think that might be one of the reasons why I have the great fondness for this film and so many of its ilk. Yeah, I want to talk about that fight scene since you played it a little bit more. First of all, I love that it's in Bergdorf's, and the minute like the Bergdorf's appears on screen, you're like, oh shit, it's the fight. And I want to talk about this nuance because I wanted to know if anybody else out there has noticed it too. That I always even when I was little, I thought it was so good. After they have the fight, they both have an exchange with the same makeup lady. And the way that they react to the makeup lady is so telling of their characters. Like, Ben Midler sort of, she's like, can I help you? And Ben Midler sort of like, no. And then walks away. And remember her, she's like, oh no, thank you so much. And I don't know, I always thought that was a great little touch. Like, that, and just so 80s to include that little scene.
And so Gary Marshall to have little bits like that.
Mm-hmm.
He's always including little bits from, like, characters like a sales lady or a bellhop in his movies, and
yes.
and some sound bites. Beaches, we love it. Sorry. And so I'm going to move on to my number one. Here we go.
I gotta cancel. Now she's stuck babysitting the Anderson kids. Sarah,
Mom got Chris to babysit for me.
Chris, her brother Brad, his best friend Daryl,
Who is this kid?
Stray dog.
Take good care of my baby. I'll guard her with my life.
what could possibly go wrong.
Chris, I'm in trouble. Hang up and sit down. I'll be there in half an hour.
This is the night when things go from bad
My mom's car!
to worse.
Big city. Scum sucker.
To ridiculous.
Wanna go to bed?
Hey, I like danger.
You should try babysitting.
And this is only the beginning.
Your friend is dead. Chris can handle it.
Sarah's probably hanging from the rafters by now. Sarah, hold on! I'm still in control here.
You could say they were having a bad night.
Any problems? No, not really.
If they weren't having such a good time. Adventures in babysitting.
Think your parents will ever ask me to babysit again?
If they do, I'd ask them for $1 more an hour.
So yeah, Adventures in Babysitting. I know a lot of you guys out there are probably fans of this one, but I will go over the plot. Elizabeth Shue plays Chris Parker. She's a suburban babysitter who gets stood up by her smug boyfriend and then decides to take her charges into the big bad city of Chicago after her best friend desperately calls her for a ride back home. And then along for the ride is their neighbor and sex fiend Daryl, and this bunch get set off on a wild series of misadventures and misfortunes as Chris's mom's car gets blown out. Her tire gets blown out on the freeway. So yeah, Adventures in Babysitting is a movie that I absolutely love. I absolutely loved it when it first came out. I saw it 8 times at the theater. It was the summer of '87, and this was my favorite movie for the longest time ever. It's a lot of it. What makes it work, I would say, is because of Elizabeth Shue and her dynamic performance as Chris Parker. You totally love her from the first frame where she's singing along to the Crystals song. I think Elizabeth Shue had pretty much the role nailed down, but it was between her and Valerie Bertinelli for the lead role, which is a little strange. I don't know. I could sort of picture Valerie Bertinelli. Can you?
I can, except I feel like she was the age of the character in the early 80s and the 70s. I think she's probably in her late 20s or early 30s. And
yeah, she was getting a little long in the tooth. Maybe it's a
Well, to
Adventures
play
in Words.
a 17-year-old at high school.
I know this.
Elizabeth Shue was in her 30s too.
I think she was in her 20s. She had done Karate Kid like 3 years prior, and she was on a show briefly, and then she got this role. I know it was a script that might have floated around for a while. I know they were looking up like who was a contender for the role. Apparently, besides Valerie Bertinelli, it was Michelle Pfeiffer who was offered the role, but she turned it down to do Witches of Eastwick instead.
Oh wow, that was a good move.
Yeah. And Justine Bateman, who would have done it, but family ties wouldn't let her out of it. I know they were the producers of Family Ties are pretty notorious for not letting their actors out of their commitment, so they could do movies like I think Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future. Like he was initially thought for the role, and then they went with Eric Stoltz because they couldn't get Michael J. Fox because of that. So it would have been interesting seeing Justine Bateman as a choice.
Poor Justine Bateman had to make her film debut in Satisfaction.
Right. Which I like.
I do too.
Not
I
a
love
classic.
it, but you know,
It's
nobody
not a
else
classic.
did.
I'm looking up more names. Jane Fonda, Bridget
What?
Fonda. I know. I don't know how true
That
Jane
I would
Fonda
have
is.
loved to see.
Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Jodie Foster, Sharon Stone, Christine Applegate, Nicole Eggert, Kathleen Turner.
How long did this script float around for? Was it like, did it start floating around in like the 70s or like 1980?
I don't know. I heard something 70s, but it doesn't sound completely right to me since I think Chris Columbus got his career going with 1984 with Gremlins. Tatum O'Neal and Brooke Shields, Annie McDowell, Kelly McGillis, Lady Griffin.
I really wish that it had been made with all of these people. I wish there were 15 different versions of Adventures in Babysitting, each from different years.
Right. Like with today's technology, you could just like hit a button and then I want Bridget Fonda today, or maybe Michelle Pfeiffer. That would be fun.
And it could have been like Airport 75, Airport 77, like Adventures in Babysitting 81, Adventures in Babysitting 83.
Exactly. I think I mentioned I would have loved to see a sequel to Big Business, but I think most of all probably Adventures in Babysitting. They could have really exploited that. It was kind of a hit. It wasn't as huge as some of the other Touchstone movies, but it was ripe for a sequel, I think.
Totally.
It didn't go that route. Apparently, Steven Spielberg really wanted Chris Columbus to direct this movie. He had written Gremlins for him, so much so that he was willing to be a producer on the film and make it an Amblin title. But apparently Disney said, no, that Chris Columbus had the job, and so he didn't have to do that. But it would have been interesting if it ended up being a Spielberg production. It has kind of that feel of it.
It does. The Goonies-esque.
Yes, very Goonies-esque in Chicago. Bit of trivia. Bradley Whitford, who played Chris's jerky boyfriend, Mike. Sorry.
The worst.
Sorry. Yeah. His actual Camaro is in the movie. And the license plate's so cool was actually his license plate.
Oh, no.
Sorry, Bradley Whitford, but I don't think it's highly of you anymore. You just make me think you're just Mike in real life. Sad. And then there's like a bit of the Halloween music, the John Carpenter score, in a scene where the character's watching TV. I think they're watching like music videos, like MTV, and then you can hear a bit of like John Carpenter's scores. Apparently, it was a nod to Deborah Hill, who was one of the producers, who had obviously written Halloween with John Carpenter. I always thought it was weird growing up because I was a big fan of Halloween and I was a big fan of Adventures in Babysitting, and then when I heard the music and Adventures in Babysitting, I just was kind of confused because the screen wasn't showing anything from Halloween. I'm like, why is there a sound clip from Halloween.
I actually had that experience watching it this time. I was like, wait, I kept like watching and rewinding, and I was like, no, that's definitely not from Halloween.
It's so bizarre because I think they're showing like a Michael Jackson music video on the screen while it's playing. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? I met the writer of the movie. I met Daniel Waters, the guy who wrote Heathers once.
Oh, yeah.
I was the manager of this video store, and I kind of did this thing where we did our top 10 movies lists. I kept changing them out, and he came in. He so happened to come in on the day when I had put up a top 10 teen comedies list. And both Heathers and Adventures in Babysitting were on the list. And he came over to me. We had a conversation about Heathers, and he asked me about it. And he also mentioned that the writer of Adventures in Babysitting was a friend of his, and he had went to high school with him or something. And he would actually tell him that I was a big fan of the movie.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I took great pleasure knowing that the writers of Adventures in Babysitting knew I loved his movie, since I was such a big fan of it for such a long time. What are your thoughts on the film?
I distinctly remember the first time that I saw Adventures in Babysitting. I was being babysat by my cousin Rachel, who maybe I'll tell her to listen to this podcast. And I was young, probably around the same age I saw Beaches, but I was already obsessed with horror movies and R-rated horror movies, which my parents let me watch way too many of. So she took me to the video store, and I was like, oh, I want to rent, like Flowers in the Attic or Nightmare on Elm Street 4, and she was like, we'll rent Adventures in Babysitting. And I was like, what's that? That sounds lame. I also saw Mannequin with her for the first time, by the way.
Love Mannequin.
So she was just a great influence. So I was like, all right, well, whatever. I'm not going to win this argument. But then as soon as she turned it on and there was Elizabeth Shue dancing to the Crystals, I was just like, it was like Beaches, and I was just like, I remember thinking this is the most entertaining movie that has ever been made. This is the most gripping, the most important, perfect film ever, and I loved it. And I still feel that way. I agree with you. Elizabeth Shue is just the best, and I would have liked to see her in so many more movies. I mean, she has had a great career, but I want her to be in every movie. Everything you said, I basically agree with. I love the scenes in suburbia because they really just. My house wasn't as big as the house of the kids in Adventures in Babysitting, but it really conveys the 80s suburbia feel. The only thing they miss is that they don't order pizza, because that's what you always did in the suburbs when you had a babysitter on Friday night. He looks like he's making macaroni and cheese or something, which maybe that was an appropriate alternative. I love, is it Penelope Ann Miller who plays Brenda?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god. Every single minute with her is perfect. Not just the scenes in the bus station, which are obviously iconic, but also the early scene where she's bitching about the boyfriend. Just the look on her face is so like, I've had it. She's great. And the movie does such a great job of making fun of suburban privileged kids, the things that are terrifying to them, like the bus station, you don't want to go to the bus station. That's always such a scary place. When I was reading about Adventures in Babysitting, just for the podcast, Googling it, I was very interested to find that a lot of people criticized it for being racist, which is never something that I had thought of. And, I started asking myself now, like, is it racist? Because almost all of the people of color in the movie are criminals or bad guys or musicians. The one person of color who's a good guy is a car thief. And I don't know. I always interpreted it more as the kind of a satire on privileged white kids' perceptions of people of color in the 80s. But I mean, maybe that, I don't know. I might be reading it.
No, I agree. But it's a lot like the scene in Weird Science when he goes into the blues bar and all the music stops.
Yeah, exactly.
They're obviously different from everybody else, and it's part of the satire. I think it's not, these kids are from the suburbs, and why can't there be that point of view of kids from the suburbs?
And you're supposed to laugh at it. It's supposed to be funny.
Exactly.
So I don't know. I think I forgive Adventures in Babysitting, and I don't think it's racist. Although I don't, nothing against the people who do.
I think because it was set in the suburbs, and because I was from the big bad city myself, I thought it was an interesting perspective, and I was kind of obsessed with the idea of maybe living in the suburbs one day, and kind of looking at life through their point of view rather than growing up so quickly as you do in a big city like New York, and maybe looking at life through a bit more innocent eyes. I think that element kind of appealed to me a lot, looking back at it. And the characters. I like the kids, Keith Coogan, Maya Bruton, and especially Anthony Rapp as Daryl. He's a lot of fun.
He's brilliant.
And some of the side characters are a lot of fun to watch. I don't like I still am angry at the fact that she just kind of hooks up with a frat guy.
Yeah.
At a frat party. It still bothers me. That bothers me the most out of anything that might have been misconstrued about the film with the racism. But she hooks up with a frat guy.
He's it's such a glorified frat guy too. This is the thing. You were saying that you always, we come from different perspectives because you grew up in the big bad city and I grew up in the suburbs, and watching Adventures in Babysitting, you thought, it would be great to live in the suburbs. But actually, its depiction of the suburbs is totally fictional too, because the suburbs is terrible and filled with all sorts of twisted, perverted shit that also makes you grow up too fast. It's just much more repressed, I think, than in the big city. And the same is true for the frat guy. I mean, this is the most ridiculously perfect, nice, sensitive, good frat guy ever, and probably never could ever exist.
Exactly, complete fantasy frat guy for her.
And I guess she's just a big pack of lies.
And a lot of it's because she's owed that, because she's going on this series of horrible adventures, and she loses her boyfriend in the process. So, getting a guy at the end is her way of being made up to. But I don't know.
And I do like the touching moment when the older brother who's in love with her closes the window and he's realized that he has to move on.
I so identified with that character. I wanted to. Obviously, I was obsessed with Elizabeth Shue, and I would have loved for her to be my girlfriend. I was 12, so
did you
younger
ever
than he was.
Babysitter who you were in love with?
I didn't have babysitters growing up. That's another element of the suburban factor I was fascinated about, having babysitters, and maybe going to the ice cream shop with the babysitter.
Yeah, totally. Oh, they must have got out for ice cream. It's that's so fabulous.
I wanted a night like that.
That I had several very Elizabeth Shue-esque babysitters who were to be the coolest people in the entire world and taught me everything that I know about life.
So instead of getting Elizabeth Shue, I married someone who was a babysitter when she was a kid. So it all comes full circle.
Right say.
It's just we didn't mention the big scene in the club.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously one of the biggest set pieces in the movie, and what a lot of people kind of remember the film by. I think it's a great musical number. I mean, I love when a movie stops to do a musical number.
She rocks that. I love the part in a big old Cadillac. It's yes, she's going there.
She does it so much better than, I want to say, someone like Ferris Bueller.
Oh, yeah.
I was listening to Ebert and Siskel's review of this movie, and I think Ebert kind of sort of liked it, but gave it a thumbs down, and Siskel really liked it. I think Siskel mentioned how this movie was so much more fun than Ferris Bueller's Day Off, because they actually go on adventures and do stuff, whereas in Ferris Bueller they kind of do things. it's maybe it's not as completely satisfying on a visceral level.
That's such a good point. Like, whoop-de-doo, they go to a museum and a football game or whatever. It's like, that's not very exciting.
Right.
They don't really have their perspective shifted by anything that they see.
Right. And you know, the musical number is complete fantasy, and in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and it's not his voice. It's someone, you know, it's the original composer of the song, and here she's singing her heart out. She's not the greatest singer, but she does a great job.
Yes, that's right.
And she's really charming and letting it all hang out. You can see why us 12-year-old boys fell in love.
It's interesting. It makes me think about the different intended audiences for Ferris Bueller and Adventures in Babysitting, because I feel like Ferris Bueller types would want the fantasy, would want him to sound like Frank Sinatra, whereas Elizabeth Shue types, I mean the characters, not the Chris types, would want, you know, her to use what she really has and make the most of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm definitely a Chris type. I actually just bought Ferris Bueller on Blu-ray because I haven't seen it in a while. And it was $5. But the last time I saw it, I was like, ugh, he's so annoying. I totally identified with Jennifer Grey and Mr. Rooney.
That's, you know, part of why Ferris Bueller's works is because you actually do care about a lot of the other characters, sometimes a lot more than its central character. So you will go back to it to see their scenes, enjoy their scenes. But Adventures of Babysitting, because she's the central character, you're with her throughout the whole thing, and
yes.
Everyone else shines around her too. Penelope Ann Miller, that scene that, like you said, they mentioned the scene early on. I love that she hates her stepmother so much she threatens to put Drano in her tab. How 80s.
That was a big thing in the late 80s too. Feeding people you hate Drano.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's a Heather's connection, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe they came up with that together.
That's what happens when you go to high school in Indiana. You think of ways to kill people with Drano. It's not as dark as Heather's. It doesn't take those turns. Obviously, kind of everything's kind of all squeaky clean by the end. But that's kind of like how you want to feel by the end of the movie. You want to feel like everything is okay now. They survived the night.
Yes.
And you walk away with a good feeling, even though she leaves with a jerky frat guy. It's just a lot of fun. Adventures of Babysitting will always be a favorite movie of mine. It may not be as important to me like it was when I was a kid, obviously, but it always wins my heart. Do you have it on DVD or a Blu-ray?
I have the ancient DVD, which isn't even like an anamorphic transfer. So I don't know. Is the Blu-ray worth the upgrade?
Yeah, it's definitely worth the upgrade. It doesn't have like special features or whatever, even though it could claim it promises to be a 25th anniversary edition or something.
Okay.
But it looks really good. The transfer is really clean and sharp, and the cinematography really pops out in it. And a lot of the matte paintings in this movie, which I don't mind at all. A lot of it was filmed in Toronto, I believe.
Uh-huh.
So they had to fake Chicago half the time, or more than half the time. And so there are a lot of matte paintings in the background especially of the building in Chicago that her dad works at. Yes. They ultimately scale later in the movie. And I think matte paintings are charming in movies. I don't mind them at all. I'd rather see them than digital work, but that's just me. That's why
especially in a movie that's like that, like a kind of nightmarish adventure. It sort of adds to the magic of it all.
Any final thoughts about Touchstone films?
No, I don't think so. It has been so wonderful revisiting all of these movies. I think we should definitely do Touchstone in the 90s, too.
Oh, I can't wait to do that one. I have quite a few favorites, especially early on in the 90s.
Yes, there was a quick decline, like after 1994.
We'll definitely discuss those in the future, so look out for that one.
Keep listening. What video store did you work at in New York?
I worked at Kim's Video.
That was my video store when I lived there. It's everybody's video store, I guess.
I worked there from 1996 through 2010.
Oh, wait, really? Was it the one on St. Mark's Place?
I worked at all of them. I was the buyer for I was a buyer for Kim's from throughout all the 2000s.
Oh, so you weren't were you ever at the front desk?
I was at Kim's Underground, which was on Bleecker and LaGuardia. I was at the Avenue A store for a little bit. I was at all of them at some point as a manager, or I started out as a clerk, but I became a manager really quickly at the one on Bleecker and Underground, Bleecker and LaGuardia.
It is very possible that we have met at Kim's Video.
We probably have. I'm sure I ordered a movie that you ended up renting or bought, for sure, at least.
I would bet that that's true.
So I watched a lot of movies in my day. I like movies.
Do you have any final Touchstone thoughts?
No, I mean, I just I go back to them from time to time, and I'm always filled with nostalgia, and I'm always more than happy to see some of these movies again. I don't think there's a movie on this list where I hesitate to watch. You should check them out if you haven't seen any of these films. I think you might be surprised that you might like something that you might not have or more ordinarily liked. That's pretty much it.
All right.
So what do you got going on this weekend?
I don't know. I really want to see Vampire Academy because you turned me onto it. I didn't even know it was opening this weekend. Other than that, not many plans. What about you?
Vampire Academy was from the writer of Heathers, which you mentioned 3 times this time. Podcast. I probably will hang out today or tomorrow with someone. Do some errands, that sort of thing. Nothing too exciting. Yeah, so hopefully you have a nice weekend. I think I'm going to listen to more episodes of that Suck the Joy podcast. I really got into that. I urge you guys to check it out. It's a podcast that's hosted by Kathleen Wilhoit, the actress, who was in a bunch of movies like Witchboard and Murphy's Law. And she co-hosted with a friend of hers named Corey, and I've been getting really into it. It's pretty fun, so check it out.
I'm going to have to listen to that too. I'm so excited to hear about it, because I've wondered where she was, and I just rewatched Witchboard on Blu-ray, and I had so much fun watching it.
Oh yeah, Witchboard from Scream Factory was it's my favorite of those 2 movies, Night of the Demons. It's a lot of fun. So check that one out too. All right, guys. So we're going to leave you, and I hope you had fun, and hopefully we'll see you in episode number 4.
Yes.
Take care.
You can find Ben at eyesofbensher.blogspot.com or his articles on Chiller TV, and you can find me at cinemadomeep.com, and especially on Facebook. That's facebook.com/cinemadomeep. See you guys there.
Good morning, Michelle.
Appreciation schedule. On my desk by 5. Stuart, you know, when I ask for demographics, I expect you to include all age groups.
Children 7 to 13 don't purchase stocks, Miss
I
Shelton.
did. Miss Shelton, is this how we dress for the office? You look like a blood clot.
Everything's ready for the board meeting.
Flow charts. Profit pyramid.
I hope you'll be pleased. We were here until...
What's going on in research? More money for more lab rats?
Some of our new products seem to create adverse reactions.
Get tougher rats.
Don't fuck with the lords of hell.
Don't fuck with the babysitter.